Hello, today on my channel you will hear an amazing story about life. I hope you enjoy this story. This one struck me to the core. Honestly, I still can't forget it. Enjoy watching.
This funeral was not crowded, but if an outsider happened to be at the funeral ceremony, he would have found it rich. A luxurious oak coffin, well-dressed people, expensive foreign cars outside the cemetery gates. Everything indicated that the deceased was a wealthy woman, and that was indeed the case. The owner of a solid construction company, 2 beauty salons, and a fashion magazine was being buried. Philanthropist and extraordinary person Emily Jackson. We have come to see off a person who has made a significant contribution to the development of the city. With a sad expression began his speech, a man in a suit costing half a year's budget of an average citizen. A successful, full of strength, beautiful woman is left. Every now and then we heard, what a nightmare. She was very young. Yes, only 35. She should have lived on. She was a golden woman, some people thought. But what hypocrisy! The priest thought with indignation. The unsightly inkwell of darkness before his eyes slowly but surely dissipated. At last it gave way to the unusual darkness that happens when one's eyes are closed. The first thing she heard were the words, "God rest the souls of the departed. Emily, your servant." The words were spoken in a chant, the way priests usually recited prayers during the service. And to be sure, she could hear voices around her during the service, Jake's sobs. And she felt strange, like she was in some other reality. And then she was suddenly afraid. But where had that fear come from, and where was she? She didn't remember how much time had passed before she heard her mother's voice. "Emily, who did you leave us for? And I never got to have grandchildren. I feel like I'm at my own funeral," Emily thought absently. She opened her eyes. When she realized that she was, her body was gripped by terror. That fear finally brought her to consciousness. "But how come I'm being buried?" Emily thought. Or maybe this is a bad dream altogether. However, despite the floor and unconsciousness, she realized more and more clearly that all this was not happening at her successful business, but in fact she was lying in a coffin. And the people gathered were mourning her. She desperately wanted to jump out of the coffin and scream that she was alive, but all she had the strength to do was open her eyes a little. And then Emily suddenly realized that she should hold off on that decision, because there was a reason for all this. With an effort of will, she slanted her eyes and noticed her husband's mistress standing a little aside, filming the entire funeral ceremony on her cell phone camera. You may ask how she knew that a spectacular blonde of about 25 years old was her husband's mistress, and yet, Emily knew it very well. After all, a few days before this very ridiculous funeral, she saw with her own eyes as her husband passionately kissed in a restaurant with this blonde beauty. At another time, Emily would have dealt with this discovery, but only she was on business negotiations and could not afford to take liberties in the presence of potential business partners. No, Emily Jackson would not stoop to fighting over hair and other nonsense, but to say a couple of words that would smear this girl with snot on the wall, that she would gladly. But why lose face when you can sort it out later? It was a whim of fate that had gotten her husband off scot-free. Emily had long suspected Hank of infidelity. It's classic. His husband was working late, and his shirt collar was often covered in red and scarlet lipstick, and of course the work calls. Emily might not have said, "So what if he's going out? He's not the first, he's not the last." He would have gone out and returned to his family, however. The scene in the restaurant was the last straw. Totally lost shame and conscience, firmly decided that evening Emily decided to put an end to everything. But she never did. Something had gone wrong. But what? And wasn't that why she woke up in the coffin? And then Emily happened to meet the priest's gaze. Or rather, Father John looked at her out of the corner of his eye. For a second, there was a flicker of horror in his eyes. But to his credit, he managed to pull himself together. What's more, the priest didn't let on that he'd seen the whole thing. By the way, he was quite young, not an old man of course, but he was far from a venerable elder. Maybe he understood everything. Emily thought hopefully. That would be good. Now the main thing is to let him know so he doesn't give me away. Father John wondered if he thought the deceased or not had opened her eyes, so he decided to see if he had lost his mind. To his utter amazement, the woman lying in the coffin opened her eyes and then closed them again. She seemed to be asking not to be given away. I guessed it, the priest thought. And that's to say, no husband at the funeral. Strange, strange. And this lady with the cell phone is not shy at all. Probably, together with her husband, decided to get rid of her and take all the capital. Father John knew and respected Jennifer Raymond. More than once she came to the church with things. Food, medicines. She often donated large sums of money. Unlike many wealthy people, she did not do charity because it was her custom, but out of the dictates of her heart. What can I say? This wonderful woman helped many people. When Father John, in the world Alex Pollard, learned that he was to give the funeral of this amazing woman, he was honored. Don't worry, servant of God Jennifer. I won't give you away, the priest thought, and having had his moment, he touched the woman and squeezed her hand lightly. Jennifer exhaled with relief. There were very few people at the funeral, and it suggested that the funeral ceremony was organized in a hurry, just to get buried faster. Otherwise, she might wake up. The only person who genuinely mourned Jennifer's passing was her mother, Mary Johnson, staring blankly at the coffin with her daughter's body. But unlike the priest, she didn't notice anything. She recalled when Jennifer was in her 3rd year of college, her father Walter had died, leaving the family a small construction company. But Mary didn't know what to do with it. "I'll take over the management of the firm," Jennifer, who was the eldest daughter, promised. Her younger brother Logan was in 10th grade at the time. "Yeah, but what are we going to do with her now?" sighed the grief-stricken mother. "Like what?" the girl exclaimed. "And Kevin's kids?" Uncle Kevin was Walter's best friend, and also Marina's godfather. "Uncle Kevin will be running the firm and teaching me everything at the same time." Jennifer spoke with such fervor that Mary smiled involuntarily. Only when you're young does it seem so easy and simple. In the meantime, Jennifer had put her plan into action. She entered the Faculty of Economics, and after classes went to the office, and with the help of her godfather learned the wisdom of business. Having defended her diploma, the girl stood at the helm of the company. At first, employees did not take seriously this upstart, but over time were forced to change their minds. Their firm gained momentum, and in the end, became one of the most successful construction organizations in the region. "Father would be proud of you," said his mother. And then there were beauty salons, a fashion magazine, and marriage. The future son-in-law immediately did not like Mary Johnson. Hank Rogers seemed to her arrogant, and in general some kind of slippery type. However, she respected the choice of her daughter Victoria. Hank's mistress filmed the procession and hid the phone in a black lacquered purse. Sufficiently, she refused to take any further pictures. The sight of guilt buried in the grave was distasteful to her. Someone in attendance led the way to the car of Mary Johnson, who was feeling ill. Soon everyone dispersed. The rest of the funeral procession and the ritual service guys grabbed their shovels. "Guys, wait a minute," Father John commanded them. The gravediggers built disgruntled mien, but obeyed, and the priest jumped into the abandoned grave, opened the coffin, and in front of the astonished boys gave Jennifer his hand. She struggled out of the coffin, and if Father John hadn't picked her up in time, the poor woman would have fainted. "Well, what are we standing here for?" "Help," shouted the gravediggers. 2 lads, pulling themselves together, helped them out of the hole. One of them, stammering, asked, "What was that just now?" "And that, my children, is a resurrection from the dead," Father John said earnestly, and looked meaningfully at the boys, hoping it would remain a secret. The gravediggers looked in amazement at the priest and the businesswoman, and, unable to utter a word, nodded. "But what are we standing for?" "We're working," Father John said, and putting his arm around Jennifer's waist as she wobbled from side to side, led her to the car. That was a spicy funeral, the priest thought. Still, it's not every day you get to see someone come back from the dead when they didn't reach Father John's car. Jennifer 3 then saw on Leah. "Feel better?" the priest inquired, handing her a bottle of water. The woman nodded with difficulty, moving her unyielding lips. The unexpected savior settled Jennifer in the back seat of his car and looked at her intently. "There are signs of poisoning," Jennifer stated. She nodded thoughtfully. She couldn't help but realize that it was probably Hank's doing. "You should change your clothes," Father Walter remarked. "I should," Jennifer echoed. She couldn't wait to get out of the hated burial garment. But truth be told, what she wanted more than anything else in the world was a long, good night's sleep. And, of course, in a soft bed. "Except where all those were what?" Jennifer yawned. "But there's no problem with that," smiled the priest. "The temple is full of clothes donated by good people. Unless you're squeamish." "Of course, I'm in no position to be squeamish about anything right now," Jennifer sighed, feeling a bout of nausea again. "Besides, I'm sure the stuff is in excellent condition, that's right." "The girls are good," the priest replied, referring to the temple helpers. The nausea was building, and Jennifer, anticipating another bout of vomiting, asked Father Walter to stop the car. "That's good," he muttered, satisfied. "The body is fighting back. Isn't it well?" "Yes. And you were born with your shirt on," Jennifer smiled. "If it weren't for you, I'd really be buried, and good riddance," which is true. That's true. But let's not talk about the sad stuff. You're alive. The rest will come when they reach the temple. The priest helped Jennifer out of the car, and, noticing that she was still wobbly, said, "Hold on to me." Jennifer obeyed. "Girls, don't be frightened," Father Walter said to those present as they walked to the temple. Those looked at the visitor in horror, and as if on cue crossed themselves. "It's not a ghost," the priest reassured the women and recounted what had happened in the cemetery. Father Walter brought some hot aromatic decoction that made Jennifer feel a little better, and then told the temple attendant to bring her things. Jennifer happily changed into a batiste-colored dress and rather comfortable flesh-colored ballet flats. "Changing clothes makes me breathe a little easier," Mary thought, as she looked in the mirror. How nice it is to come back to life. But where to go now? She couldn't go home yet, though she would love to see Hank's face. Jennifer remembered her mother's lament, and her heart ached with pity. She mentally prayed that nothing would stop her from letting her mom know she was alive. "Well, their Father Walter said approvingly when he saw Jennifer in her new outfit, 'You look great. Now let's go to my house and get some proper rest. And then we'll decide how you're going to live your lives.' "Is that comfortable?" Jennifer asked. Convenient, he assured her. "Well, here we are," the priest said with a smile. "You're welcome." Father Walter lived in a large, good-sized wooden house a couple blocks from the temple. As they entered the hallway, A girl of about 12 or 13 came out to meet them. "Ashley is my little girl," the priest said adoringly, looking at her. "Alyosha and Mama's chief helper, how many do you have?" The guest asked with a smile. 3. Father Walter's wife, unlike the church attendants, did not make fearful eyes. Apparently she was privy to this incredible story. "But welcome to sinful earth," said the priest's wife. "Let us make your acquaintance. Though I've already met you, and I'm an pleasure to meet you likewise," she nodded. "Well now, please come to the table Polanski would receive besides Ashley." They had 2 twin sons, Ben and Ray, and a young daughter, Bella. Ashley was 14, the boys were 11 each, and the little girl was only 5. When everyone sat down at the table, all the children, including the youngest, Cody, said a prayer. And only then did they begin the meal. "I don't know how to pray at all," Jennifer said, embarrassed. "Well, don't," Father Walter declared. "It's better to be honest and say you don't know how to pray than to pretend you don't." The first porridge with the chicken cutlets was excellent, and an unpretentious salad of cucumbers, tomatoes, and radishes, fragrant greens, seemed to the guest tastier than a restaurant salad. When his wife and eldest daughter went to prepare for tea, Jennifer said, "Your spouse is an excellent cook, as are you, Father Walter." Walter smiled. "The master of the house is here, and Walter, I see," she nodded. "So, Walter, your wife is an excellent cook, and you have a wonderful family in general. Thank you." And kind Anne served a sponge cake with coffee cream filling for tea. "Oh, it's delicious," Jennifer gulped, taking a bite right in her mouth. Anne smiled, pleased with the praise. After lunch, Walter left for the temple to finish some chores. Anne suggested, "Perhaps you'd like to rest." She noticed that the guests were beginning to peck their noses. "Yes, there is that," Jennifer replied, embarrassed after a delicious lunch. "Let's go. The beds are in the far room," the hostess said. "I'd be very grateful," replied the guest. The room proved to be large, bright, and very cozy. Jennifer did not fail to say so to the hospitable Anne. "Well, it's good that you like it," she replied. Jennifer woke up towards evening. Alex wasn't there yet. "Yes, priests stay late at work," Anne said with divorced hands. The guest remembered her husband, who also stayed late at work. Now what's with the stupid thoughts? Jennifer condemned herself. How could one compare this good, bright man with a rogue? "Jennifer, let's have some tea," suggested the landlady. "With pleasure," smiled the guest. The women settled themselves on the terrace. Looking around, Jennifer noted the original landscape design and asked, "And who is the author of this beauty?" "I did," Anne replied. "Really?" The businesswoman, who had been to many rich people's homes but had never seen such beauty. "Really?" nodded the minister's wife. "You have simply golden hands. I've never seen anything like it. Believe me, I have something to compare it to. You should be doing this professionally," Jennifer exclaimed. "I believe I do," Anne smiled. "But it's not just my credit. I've had Ashley's help. She literally raves about landscaping. You know, Alex has always said great things about you, and I'm happy I got to meet such a unique woman." "Oh, well, so unique," the guest shook her head with a smile. "Your husband has done a lot of good things, too. Being a priest seems to be his calling." A shadow ran across Anne's face. "Is something wrong?" Jennifer inquired, noticing the change. "You'll forgive me if I said something wrong." "It's fine," her companion hastened to assure her. "It's just that before becoming a priest, Alex was a doctor." "And what happened?" the guest asked cautiously. And Anne told her that her husband was a talented surgeon. Alex Smith had pulled more than one patient from the other side of the world, and people were eager to get to him. They relied on Smith as if he were God, but he was a mere mortal who just tried to do his job well. One day Alex came across a patient who was completely hopeless. The case was so bad that he wondered how the patient was still alive. "We're not going to make it," Alex told his wife over breakfast on the day of the operation. In this case, death would be a release from suffering for him. For the relatives, however, Surgeon Smith was the last chance. But, alas, there are no miracles. The patient passed away on the operating table. The hardest thing for Alex was to inform his relatives of his death, Anne recalled. He felt guilty, even though in fact there was no guilt on him. "Yes, people often conjure up images of wizards," Jennifer said quietly, "and when those don't live up to expectations, they look at them with a mute reproach that is often worse than any hurtful words." "That's true," agreed her interlocutor. Not a day went by that Alex didn't talk about the looks the relatives of the deceased looked at him with, even woke up at night. And then he got drunk and broke down. He said he was asked to leave his job. Out of respect for his former merits, they suggested he write a statement of his own volition. It lasted 2 months, which became a real hell for us. Alex wandered the streets, sometimes joining the local homeless. One day he came home covered in bruises and abrasions. Anne continued. "Not a fun memory. I cried and begged him to stop, but it was no use. As Alex went on another drunken ramble through the city, I was horrified to think that every day could be his last. Who knows what kind of trouble he could get into. But one day my spouse came home completely sober and handed me a bouquet of wildflowers and said he wouldn't take another drop in his mouth. It turns out that when Alex went into a small store for another batch of cheap alcohol, he met a priest. "Is it worth it?" he said. "Well, you had a drink today. It made you feel better. And then the same thing tomorrow. The day after tomorrow. Many more days. But then what? Alex wanted to answer the Batiushka that it was none of his business. But when he looked into those kind eyes, the words stuck somewhere in his throat. The men left the store together and headed for the temple. Alex said he felt like he had wings after talking to the priest. Anne said. Jennifer still couldn't hold back the tears. Would you have seen his face that day? Alex never returned to the hospital. And a couple months later, Anne proudly told her husband Mary that they were dreaming of a new addition to the family. For some reason, Jennifer's family was overcome with excitement. Do you have a wonderful family? Anne asked. Yes, family is the most important thing, Anne replied seriously, noticing that the guest had grown sad, and added, don't worry, you'll still have it. A bright person like you can't have it any other way. God willing, Jennifer sighed. As the women talked, they did not notice that the time had passed midnight. They didn't want to sleep, so Anne suggested a drink. I don't really drink either, she said, but it would be nice to have a drink with a guest like you, Jennifer. Yes, I wouldn't want Alex to know we were talking. You don't have to worry about that. Alex came back in the morning, and when Jennifer woke up, he handed her some kind of liquid that smelled like herbs. Here, I've made you a little something quick, he said. What is it? Jennifer asked. Don't worry, it's not poison. It's a decoction to detoxify your body. Thank you so much, Mary said with emotion. The potion was surprisingly effective. By evening, Jennifer felt as if she hadn't been poisoned and unconscious. The next morning, she brushed her hair, tied Anne's headscarf, and wearing dark glasses, went to her mother's house. When she saw her daughter alive, Mary could not believe her eyes and began to be baptized. Oh, I guess that's how everyone who sees me will react now, Jennifer thought with bitter irony. But you were buried, her mother whispered in amazement. Buried, but not buried, Jennifer grinned sadly and hugged her tightly. They drank tea, and Jennifer told about her resurrection. I was sick that day, Mary said quietly. I couldn't find the strength to come to you and say goodbye. Her daughter nodded. That's a pity. Otherwise, you would have known I was alive. What is there to say now? The mother smiled. The main thing is that you are really alive. Are you staying with the priest now? Yes, I don't want to bother his family, but I'm not going home until I get to the bottom of this story. It could be dangerous, said the daughter. Why don't you stay with me? No, I don't think that would be safe either. Jennifer shook her head. I'll figure it out, and we'll go to Hawaii with you. Or would you rather go to Florida? Oh, I'd rather you be okay, Mary said with a sigh, but it's not going to come to that. We'll get through this. They sat for another hour or so. Then Jennifer went to the Pollards. She hated to go, but she knew that until everything was cleared up, she could not think of staying with her mother and other relatives long enough to put them in danger. Bye, Mom, she said, kissing her. I hope to see you soon. God willing. Living in the Pollard home, Jennifer never tired of marveling at the family atmosphere. Everyone here not just loved and respected, but idolized each other. She constantly remembered Anne's words that everything will be fine, but frankly there was little hope, at least not until she got her husband Valerie sorted out. Upon reflection, Jennifer decided not to rush to rise from the kingdom of the dead first. She wanted to check up on Valerie, but how could she do that? Maybe change clothes and follow him? Jennifer pondered. What if he recognized me? He might recognize you, Anne said, but not me. And her eyes twinkled with mischievous light. Jennifer looked at her in amazement. Are you going to go to my husband? Why not? You're an adventurer, aren't you? Jennifer marveled. We are all a little adventurous, replied Anne. The women talked for a while and decided that Anne didn't have to go to Valerie. But what would she say to him? Jennifer asked. The grandmothers on the bench were another matter. They are the best source of information. Anne wore a pretty light dress of lilac color with a pink pattern, complemented the outfit with a wide-brimmed straw hat and a small purse. She made her makeup a little brighter than usual. And with a heavy sigh, I took out of the closet beige stiletto shoes. I haven't worn high heels in ages, she complained, but as they say, art requires sacrifice. The final touch was bright, spectacular makeup. Who's that? The old ladies whispered, seeing a spectacular lady in a hat. Anne, having heard the whispers of the grandmothers, decided that it was time to act. Hello, she greeted them. Hello, if you're not joking, said the largest and most serious of them slowly. And who would you be? I'm an acquaintance of Hank Rokotov's, Anne said, her eyes downcast. Why are your eyes down? Granny asked in the tone of a prosecutor. You must have a mistress. But the matter was hushed up. No, Mrs. Hudson, said another. He's too old for mistresses. They go out with younger men. It made Anne laugh. Grandmother must know what she's talking about, she thought. The hubby must have cheated with a younger woman. That's what I'm saying. Just an acquaintance of Hank's. Anne smiled disarmingly and sighed with relief. She didn't want to be even the imaginary mistress of that disgusting man. Well, if you know Hank, you should know where he is now, Mrs. Hudson said, continuing to glare at her. As it happens, we haven't seen each other or called each other in a while, Anne said. But I know Hank still lives here. You went to the cottage. He's still living here, said a third neighbor. Yes, but they arrested Hank. They arrested him. What for? It's not known. Murdering his wife. They buried the baby yesterday. The grandmothers began to baptize, and Anne hurried away. She walked to the nearest cafe and, after ordering, took out her cell phone and called the police, and made sure that Hank Rokotov was really there and was suspected of murdering his wife. What on earth is this? Jennifer exclaimed after hearing Anne's story. I don't get it. Looks like I'm going to have to emerge from oblivion. The next day, Jennifer Rokotova herself visited the department. The duty officer, seeing the resurrected businesswoman, almost began to stutter. But he couldn't say another word. Jennifer took pity on the poor man. Calm down, I'm not a ghost. There's been a misunderstanding. In fact, that's why I'm here. Eventually, she learned that the basis for Hank's arrest was an audio recording that had been sent to the police station anonymously. The tape contained the voices of Hank and his mistress Victoria, who, by the way, was also detained. They were making and discussing plans to eliminate the obstacle to their happiness, that is, Jennifer. It's getting worse by the hour, she thought with annoyance. Even if I was really buried, they would not do without exhumation and subsequent examination of the body. Anyway, riddles upon riddles. Mystery number 1, who set up Hank and this Victoria? Mystery number 2, what was the purpose of him doing this and allowing Jennifer herself to be poisoned? She didn't understand anything, but she was determined to find out as soon as possible. What if she was still in danger? Rokotov, out, came from the hallway. Why? Hank asked timidly. And the prison officer thought that this guy would have a hard time in the zone, asking a lot of questions. Don't talk, he shouted, wondering how this guy would react to the fact that his wife was alive. It was really worth looking at. The eyes of the failed rich widower widened, so that the police officers were afraid that they might not come out of their orbits. Jenny, Hank whispered in amazement. Jesus, Jenny, are you alive? Do you see? His wife grinned. Oh my God, I'm so happy. Hank, don't, Jennifer said tiredly, ignoring the curious stares of the policeman. If you're happy, it's because you're no longer a defendant. And turning to the policeman, clarified. He is no longer an accused, is he not? After receiving an affirmative answer, Jennifer firmly grabbed her husband's hand and dragged him toward the exit. The concert is over, kids, she thought with a chuckle, glancing at the police officers. Later in the car. Get in the car, Jennifer commanded. Where are we going now? Hank asked. Home, for starters, Jennifer shrugged, thinking of the priest who had lent her the car. The Rokotovs entered the apartment. Jennifer, without a word, went into the bedroom, then began to put Hank's things in the largest suitcase. Are we going somewhere? Hank asked in surprise. Jennifer looked at her husband. Was he joking? Not we, you, she corrected him. Jennifer, do you really think I'm going to live under the same roof with you after what happened? No, Hank, I didn't find myself in a dumpster. Hank said humbly. I understand. He fell at her feet, wept, and began to beg for forgiveness. Jennifer said coldly, Sweet mole, I'm begging you, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I didn't misshare you. You spit on me. No, you shit on my soul, and I'm supposed to forgive you.
You almost poisoned me.
But I didn't poison you, Hank sobbed, smearing tears down his face. I didn't even have time to put poison in your food that day. I was just about to. Jennifer laughed hysterically, but suddenly calmed down and said with a sigh, Well, at least you're honest. Now, get out. What? Stupefied Walter. What did you say? Out. I've got your things packed. My lawyer will contact you. I hope you understand why. But where am I going to go? I don't care at all, Jennifer retorted and defiantly turned away. After seeing her now almost ex-spouse off, Mary breathed a sigh of relief. Jennifer brewed coffee, grabbed a cup of the aromatic beverage and her favorite chocolate chip cookie, and went into the bedroom. Mary sipped her coffee and milk and tried to reconstruct the events of that ill-fated evening. Okay, let's go in order, she mentally said to herself. Who was in the house besides Hank? The answer was the maid. Alice, to be honest, I'd completely forgotten about her. Alice was newly hired 2 weeks before the incident, hired her on her husband's idea. He said we were busy people and could use an assistant. Alice was quite young, and the businesswoman wondered if she and Walter were having an affair. It doesn't matter now, though. Although, who knows? In any case, Jennifer realized that only the maid could have put poison in the orange juice she'd asked Alice to make. So the recording of her husband's conversation with his mistress and their intimate relationship was the work of the maid. I wonder what purpose Walter had in filming my funeral with my mistress. In any case, the maid should have been thoroughly interviewed. Jennifer was sure a conversation with Alice would clear up a lot, if not everything. She remembered her husband telling her on the way out that the maid had gone to visit a friend. Speak of the devil, Jennifer thought, as she heard the key turn in the lock. Hello, Alice sang out and added subserviently, welcome back to the world of the living. Much obliged, the hostess nodded and said firmly, Alice, I need to talk to you about this situation. Talk, the assistant shrugged. Jennifer thought that this young woman was never shy with her language, though why should she be surprised if her inferences were correct? A sharp tongue isn't the worst of it, she began stiffly, Alice. Let's not beat around the bush. You're the one who sent the audio tape to the police, right? The one where Walter and Victoria first coo and then have a very interesting conversation. Turns out it was cool. The girl perked up. Maybe Jennifer looked at her unkindly. Well, what are you going to do to me? Find out what's what first, and then have an interrogation. That's what I'm trying to find out. The businesswoman waved her hands. And I have such an interest in this whole affair that I am your late father's illegitimate daughter, Alice shouted out. What are you staring at? Our daddy was quite the lecher. He liked to go left. But he didn't like children born out of wedlock. Never recognized me. And when I was 10, my mom died. You know what it was? Her heart gave out, because mom had to work 3 jobs to feed us. Tears appeared in the maid's eyes, but she didn't seem to notice them. Jennifer listened and couldn't believe Alice was telling her this. It simply couldn't be.
Then I was taken to an orphanage, which seemed like paradise, Alice continued. I had to survive there, but I had a nice hot meal every day, but somehow I found out we were sisters.
Alice smiled nervously. It's very simple. Before graduation, a former alcoholic told me the secret of my origins. So I decided to get back at my sister for having everything, and I was starving and endured the ridicule of my classmates because I had nothing to wear. At first, Jennifer planned to organize small disasters, for example, to write a nail on her Snow White car famous word of 3 letters, or breaking into the entrance, damaging the door, setting fire. But then she realized it wasn't serious, and you could get a fine. And how does an orphanage graduate working as a janitor have extra money? No, Jennifer was determined to get back at her sister. Ashley's a rich girl, so let her share, she thought. Deep down, Jennifer realized Ashley wasn't to blame personally, but her father was to blame. But Dad had died a long time ago, and Ashley was alive, so she should be the one to blame. But to get revenge, she had to break into her sister's house. But how? When Jennifer saw a movie in which a girl got a job as a housekeeper for rich people to avenge her mother, she thought, how am I worse? I'll be around, and I'll have more opportunities to get a job. Jennifer had to get creative. She caught up with Hank outside a business center and offered her services in no uncertain terms. I'm from far away, and I have nowhere to go. Maybe you need a maid. He thought a moment and agreed. So Jennifer got a job at her half-sister's house, and one day she treated Ashley to a potent poison. What did you expect? A stunned Ashley asked. Well, how on what? The girl shrugged her shoulders. I consulted a lawyer, and he said I'm entitled to a portion of my father's inheritance. 2 is that if the parentage can be proven, Ashley remarked, and it will be proved. But that's your right. Now get out. Jennifer gathered up her few belongings, and Ashley, shocked by the maid's revelations, watched her and pondered. She absolutely did not want to call the police, even though the good thing to do would be to do so. After all, Ashley's father was to blame for this girl. After seeing Jennifer off, she returned to the bedroom and collapsed onto the bed. Ashley's gaze fell on the picture of her father. God, how much did she idolize him? And Walter turned out to be a regular walker who also had a child on the side. Don't rush to judgment, she judged herself. You don't know how it all happened. It suddenly occurred to her that Jennifer knew she was Walter's daughter only from the word of her caretaker at the orphanage. But who told the caretaker that? Jennifer's mother? Complete nonsense. All in all, it was worth digging into. But fate had it differently. Ashley had no idea that she'd made a mistake in letting the maid go. Jennifer walked into her modest apartment on the outskirts of town and sank to the floor in exhaustion. What am I supposed to do now? With despair, the girl spoke aloud. Why do some people get everything and others nothing? Jennifer looked with hatred and saw odd furniture, bought with hands, inexpensive repairs. She decided to fight. She had to get what she was legally entitled to, no matter what the cost. Suddenly it occurred to her that she couldn't do it without an ally. But where would she get one? Maybe the lawyer Jennifer had consulted, who, by the way, looked at her with interest. What could the lawyer offer? The money Jennifer would demand from her sister as compensation for years of deprivation. One way or another, there was no way around it without an expert. So she dialed the lawyer's number. Do you have the DNA test results? Raymond John Matthews asked in a businesslike tone. No, but I don't work on borrowed time, the lawyer interrupted. Besides, it's not known whether it will turn out positive. No, my dear, I want guarantees, which you don't seem to be able to give. In short, no. Good day to you. I need assurances, Jennifer mocked. Suddenly it hit her. Vika, but of course, the girl grabbed the phone. Jennifer called Hank, and he gave her the mistress's phone number without a word. Having received it, Jennifer, without delay, called, "And you still dare to call me?" Victoria exclaimed. You think I didn't guess whose handiwork it was? Anonymous video message to the police. We have nothing more to talk about. Oh wait, you didn't give up on the teacher. If you and I joined forces. Screw you, Leslie was furious. She didn't want to believe she'd lost. No, she shouted no. Leslie shouted so loudly that she didn't immediately hear her cell phone ring. Hello, she answered. What was it you wanted to offer me? Victoria asked. Yes, we agreed to meet at the cafe. She asked to die, Leslie said with a twinkle in her eye. Victoria questioned her sanity. She wasn't opposed to it, but how to accomplish such a plan? Her eyes suddenly darkened, and a second later she felt nauseous. I'll be right back, she mumbled and stormed away from the table. What's the matter with you? Leslie asked. When Victoria returned, she shook her head and slammed down some cold water with lemon. Are you by any chance pregnant? Victoria asked, perplexed. You're a grown woman, but you don't know what happens as a result of a man-woman relationship. Leslie smirked. Come on, don't make that face. I don't care. But it could be a trump card. Yes, that's understandable, the ally replied. I just wish I knew how to use it. So let's think. 2 heads are better than 1. And they began to discuss plans for the side not hated. Meanwhile, a Pretty City news anchor was broadcasting. Today at 10:00 a.m., there was a traffic accident at the city exit. The victim, Jennifer Hudson, a well-known entrepreneur and philanthropist in the city, is in the 3rd City Hospital. Jennifer's condition is critical, but doctors are doing everything possible. As it became known, the cause of the accident was faulty brakes. The anchor mentioned the recent funeral and ended the message.
Who benefits from the businesswoman's death? Police are looking for an answer to that question.
Damn her, Victoria blurted out and dialed Leslie's number. Did you hear the latest news? You bet I did, she answered grimly. I couldn't believe my ears. Maybe she had more than one life. Or maybe she's a descendant of Cauchet the Immortal, Victoria suggested. I don't care who she is, Leslie replied. We know the number of the hospital, so there's nothing stopping us from finishing the job. Listen, do you have any money? A little bit. Why? We should consult a lawyer, Leslie said thoughtfully, or we'll be left with nothing. The newscaster's words about Jennifer's critical condition sounded too optimistic. After the accident, Jennifer was practically a vegetable. She was in a coma for a month, and when she woke up, she realized she couldn't walk. I wish I had died back then, the first time, she thought. How is this 0% chance of orphanhood? Leslie asked indignantly. It can't be. I think I've figured it out. Mary paid you to fake the test result. Young lady, we do not support any results, indignantly resented the administrator of the laboratory. By the way, slander is a criminal offense, so be careful what you say. The result of the DNA test, which Leslie had hoped for, turned out to be a disappointment. Mary spent the last of her money on the expensive examination, believing that soon we'll not need them. And now here we are, as they call it. I collected you, hiding my eyes, admitted Galena Hudson, the same teacher from the orphanage. Leslie decided to go there and find out what's wrong. Galena realized there was no point in leading the orphanage girl around by the nose. She heard about the accident and guessed that Leslie moved exclusively mercantile interest. What she exclaimed, "Yes, I realized what I did was wrong," the teacher repented. "But I wanted to add motivation to your life. You're a quick girl, and you're not stupid. Before, I kind of let you know that you have rich genes, which means that everything in your life will work out after graduation." Leslie laughed hysterically. "I should have thought of that." "I'm sorry, I meant well," Galena Hudson mumbled humiliatedly. "Yes, it is not better," continued to laugh girl. Suddenly her laughter sounded frighteningly unnatural. The teacher became alarmed, but it was too late. Leslie grabbed her by the collar of her blouse and yelled in her face. "Tell me where my wealth is. Tell me, you bitch." "Leslie, I will definitely find your wealth." "Trying to appear calm," replied Jennifer. "Now I'll tell for her." The educator came out from behind the partition. The girl in the office ran to the medical officer. When the ambulance came to take Mary to the psychiatric hospital, she grabbed a chair and threw it at the orderly. Poor guy just barely dodged it. "Where's my wealth?" Mary screamed. "Where have you put it?" Very young, thought Father John when he saw the new patient. Father John had been the caretaker of the hospital for a number of years. He supported the patients as much as he could and held services there from time to time. When Mary was brought in, Father John was on his way home. Victoria, however, wasted no time. If she had known Mary had been taken to the asylum, she would have shrugged her shoulders indifferently. They were united in their desire to get rid of Jennifer, and they couldn't go any further. She did end up pregnant with Hank's baby, and already knew he'd been arrested again. I guess he can't get away with it this time, Vika thought. Well, it was to her advantage. The mistress was well aware that he would not marry her, and if so, it was worth to extract from this story at least some benefit. Well, the lawyer's advice was very helpful. Victoria had to go to her ex-lover to get a date with Hank. Hank didn't look good. He'd lost a lot of weight. He had dark circles under his eyes. "Hi," Vika smiled. "How are you?" As you can see, he mumbled, "And I have news for you. But did they catch the one who ruined the brakes of the car?" Not fun, said Hank. And the guy who tried to poison it too. You don't know who tried to poison her. But I have a hunch. I didn't catch him by the hand, he said, and turned to the purpose of Vicky's visit. What's your news? I'm pregnant. As you can probably guess from you, darling, she said ironically. But doesn't it scare you that I'm in jail with one foot in the door? I love you, Victoria said, and I'll do anything to get you out of here. But you're going to have to do something too. And what would that be? Hank asked. You're going to have to give me power of attorney so that I can handle some of your money, she said nonchalantly. What, said Hank? You're not confused, are you? Temporarily, of course, Vika continued, ignoring his question. As long as you're here and your wife is infirm, by the way, it's in your interest. But think about it, Jennifer's treatment, lawyers and so on. Hank thought about it. She was right. Actually, Jennifer needed treatment and he needed a good lawyer. There was no one to pay. Vika's deal wasn't so bad. Okay, I'll do it, he said. I'll write out a power of attorney. As a result, the mistress received partial access to the assets of the Hudson couple, who were still officially such, but with the help of a lawyer forged documents, and was now the guardian of the paralyzed Jennifer. Mrs. Hudson was at the complete disposal of Victoria, who visited Jennifer at the hospital almost every day. She smiled sweetly at the doctors and junior staff and gave them small gifts. In the end, she managed to endear herself to all but one person. That man was Logan Parshin, an orderly. Actually, he had a diploma of a doctor, but because of the lack of a workplace, he was so far interrupted by a part-time job as an orderly. Look at her, he thought as he looked at Victoria, like a snake. He really liked Jennifer. They talked often, and Logan probably thought for the 100th time that the patient was a truly extraordinary woman. And then one day he realized he was in love. Jennifer, why don't you do some physical therapy? Logan asked me one day. As far as I know, you have a chance for a full recovery. A chance, Jennifer sighed, just a chance. And chance is the same as probability theory. The successful businesswoman and philanthropist was in a deep depression. Jennifer remembered her mother's words that there comes a moment in every person's life when he begins to value life. And she thought bitterly that this was not working out. It's more precious to her than life. Jennifer didn't suspect that the moment that could make her value life was just around the corner. Hank was overcome with foreboding. The orderly didn't understand where they were coming from, but he couldn't help it. He'd never looked forward to the night shift so much, and when he did, he got to the hospital in record time. When Hank entered the room of a sleeping Jennifer, his heart was pounding. Who are you? He asked a tall, slender woman in a glossy black wig. And what are you doing here? I'm Hank, the awake patient said in a shaky voice. This is my husband's mistress. Victoria dropped the syringe with which she had hoped to complete what she had failed to do 3 months ago, and quickly ran out of the room. But no such luck. Victoria fell right into the arms of a security guard. A few days later, Hank contacted Father John, and the two of them managed to convince Jennifer to do physical therapy. She began practicing a special method, and after a few months, she could barely walk. Yes, with a stick. But that was something. All Victoria's deeds were uncovered, and she had no choice but to confess to everything from attempted murder to fraudulent documents. In due time, Victoria gave birth to a daughter, and half an hour after the baby was born, she died of massive blood loss. Why should I be so lucky? Hank said, stroking Jennifer's belly. In about 2 months, he was going to grow up. In the meantime, Jennifer had a hunch that Ashley, Hank and Victoria's daughter, whom the couple had custody of, would be named after the priest almost immediately after her birth. But don't be puffed up, Jennifer smiled, admiring her daughter. You deserve more than anyone. You saved my life, and I will never stop thanking you for that. So this baby will be born as a token of my gratitude. Hank laughed softly. Yes, his wife whispered with a smile, to both of us for finding each other. It can't be. I robbed her of her money. The ex-husband froze when he saw his rich wife on TV. In one of Jersey City's parks, children were frolicking, couples were strolling, and young mothers with strollers were relaxing after household chores. Christopher stood by a small fountain, holding a single rose. His hands were trembling with excitement. The young, handsome 20-year-old was waiting for his girlfriend Allison, who was already 20 minutes late. She can't not show up, the young man thought to himself. Christopher had been dating Allison for a couple months now, and he'd never had her late or ignore a meeting. Finally, he saw her thin silhouette in the distance. She wasn't walking, she was floating down the road. Her gait was so graceful and airy. Christopher was tired of waiting for the time to come. He walked towards her, and as soon as the girl approached, Christopher noticed that the expression on her face was sad. "What's wrong?" he asked. "I knew you had some kind of misfortune." Christopher was worried and hugged his favorite girl. Allison didn't hug him back and didn't take the flower. The girl, embarrassed, didn't want to tell the reason for her sadness. Christopher looked her straight in the eyes and asked her to keep quiet. "I'm beginning to worry," he said. "Is your grief so great that you can't even share it with me?" "My grief is you," Allison said, and looked up at Christopher. He tensed. He hadn't done her any harm, hadn't hurt her in any way. He was generally trying to do his best to make Allison happy. He asked for clarification on exactly how he could have spoiled his beloved's mood. "You're very nice, but I'm tired of walking in parks and sitting on benches," Allison said. "You've never once invited me to a restaurant, never given me anything but these roses. You realize I need a man around me, not a boy. There's no hope for you. I can't see you as my rock." "You can just say you don't want to have a relationship with a poor man," Christopher said. The boy was insulted, humiliated, and angry. Because of this, he himself was well aware that he had no money. Christopher couldn't give Allison an expensive gift, invite her even to a movie. That would undoubtedly do a lot of damage to his wallet. "How can I have money if I'm only 20? Christopher didn't understand. "We still have a long way to go. You and I are going to grow and develop together." Allison waved her head. "I don't want to wait, I don't want to grow, and I don't want to drag anyone forward," she replied. "I want a grown-up, established man." Christopher didn't seem like the kind of man who could ever accomplish anything. Her words cut him to the core. 10 years had passed since then, and he still hadn't forgotten Allison's words. He never met that girl again. How she turned out, he didn't know. But Christopher had learned that all women were only after money, and no one was interested in sincere feelings. Allison gave him a prejudice against all girls at once. Christopher could not build a serious relationship and did not even try to get close to anyone for quite a long time. By the way, there was some truth in Allison's statement. Christopher really did not aspire to a lot of money. He had misunderstood the girl. She wasn't saying that the guy was indigent and couldn't do anything in this life. She just wanted a different standard of living. She wanted to live a rich life, and Christopher could only give her an average one. She tried to explain this to him, but it was all pointless. Christopher wasn't looking for a big paycheck. He was the kind of man who believed that big money could not be earned by honest labor. So he didn't even try. He always said that rich people were either lucky or crooks. But he never thought he would fall into one of those categories, or maybe both. Christopher was already 30 years old when he met Elizabeth. He was working at a car repair shop, and an expensive car had been brought to him. It was the kind of brand their auto repair shop had never seen before. When Christopher saw the owner of the car, his jaw nearly dropped to the floor. Elizabeth noticed the surprise. She was even pleased. The young businesswoman herself offered Christopher her phone number. She didn't look at the lack of men. She could take care of herself and fulfill her own desires. And Christopher thought for the first time that with a girl like Elizabeth he could try to build something serious. Elizabeth certainly didn't seem mercantile to him in this situation. Rather, he was becoming a keeper. Of course, the man did not assume that a rich girl could consider him as a potential fiancé. But already after the first date, it was clear that Elizabeth was not looking for a one-night stand. Although she was rich, she did not have the main treasure. She was lonely. But it couldn't be said that Christopher was her last option. No, she did take an interest in the simple car mechanic. And Christopher fell in love with Elizabeth. And not just for the money. 6 months into their relationship, he and Elizabeth were married. One day the man caught himself thinking that he was the lucky man he had thought of with contempt throughout his life. The man himself did not seem to have fully realized what he loved more than Elizabeth herself, or the life she had provided for him. And Elizabeth had spared nothing for the one she loved. Christopher no longer needed to work at the auto shop. He was learning the intricacies of running a business. Elizabeth thought about giving him his own car service for their anniversary. But for now, it was just a thought. In principle, she was happy with everything as it was. She was just worried that her spouse might consider himself uncomfortable with the fact that he lived at his wife's expense. But Christopher didn't feel any inferiority. He was more than happy with everything. Elizabeth and Christopher decided to celebrate the first anniversary of their marriage alone with each other without any lavish festivities. The couple booked a table at a restaurant. Before that, they took a boat ride. It was a day just for the two of them. But their plans were not destined to materialize. Throughout the day, Elizabeth received calls from her assistant, Ben. The young man couldn't get through. First, Elizabeth hung up, and then she turned off the phone so that nothing distracted her from communicating with her husband. Ben wrote messages that went unanswered. Eventually, he found out that his boss was celebrating her anniversary at a restaurant, so she was ignoring his calls. Ben had a lot of reasons to worry, and some pretty serious ones. There was no putting off the conversation. In the middle of the evening, when Elizabeth and Christopher were about to exchange gifts, her assistant burst into the restaurant. The girl still hadn't gotten the papers for the car service she was going to present to her spouse. "Elizabeth Igorevna, we agreed with you that if I call more than 3 times, it means that there is trouble," Ben said, panting. He was obviously running to the boss with all his legs. That was why his breathing was labored. Well, what could have been so serious on Saturday, Elizabeth didn't understand. If it was really urgent, you could have written a message and then called. The assistant replied that it wasn't just urgent, it was an emergency. He offered to step aside and talk, but Elizabeth told him she had no secrets from her husband. "You're due for an inspection on Monday," Ben told her. "And it will be the kind of inspection that will find exactly what it's looking for," he added. "We've been through so many of these inspections already that it's simply impossible to intimidate me with them," Elizabeth replied with a laugh. She always used this particular form of her employee's name when she wanted to show that she considered his words to be a mere trifle. "We've been set up this time," Ben said seriously. "Your partner, with whom, let's face it, we weren't exactly working a clean scheme, has been cooperating with the police and with the IRS. He himself was recently nailed, which is why he wants to pull you out after him." Elizabeth tensed. She was starting to worry now, too. She wanted to hug Ben, to thank him for being able to find her after all. But there was no time for tenderness. She needed to find out what Elizabeth was in danger of being tested, and what she could do to avoid the consequences. "Unfortunately, Elizabeth, it could get you jail time," Ben said without joy at all. "And there is only one way to avoid it." Elizabeth was literally numbed by the words of her assistant. She had never expected that one of her business partners could set her up so seriously. The girl conducted her business honestly, without gray schemes and fraud. And she always trusted her partners. It turns out that it was someone's planned scheme to get her out of the game. Ben said that the person who set it all up agreed to go along with it only if Elizabeth would hand over the business to him. But she'd still have to face an audit from the IRS. "How can I get out of this situation?" Elizabeth didn't understand. "You said there was an option, but I don't see any way out. I can't give my business to someone I don't know." "Unfortunately, if you don't sign over all your assets to someone else, you'll be ruined," Ben said. Christopher sat silent the whole time. He didn't understand anything about his wife's affairs. The only thing he could realize was that she was in deep trouble. Elizabeth was crying bitterly, completely confused. Christopher stood next to his beloved and hugged her. The girl clung to his arm. "But you can sign everything over to someone you trust," Ben suggested. "We'll declare you bankrupt. If you don't have anything, there's nothing to take away. It's better to hand everything over to someone close to you than to an obscure character who just wants to make a profit at your expense." Elizabeth raised her tearful eyes to the assistant, looking at him as if her whole life depended on his words. She was so depressed and frightened that she was unable to think straight. Ben had caught the boss by surprise at a moment when she was as happy and relaxed as possible. The news of the impending setup had stunned her. That's what the man was counting on. At any other moment, the girl would have realized that this was some kind of divorce, but now she didn't see the illogic and inconsistency in his words. "You can sign everything over to your parents or to your next of kin," Ben reasoned. "Or someone you trust. Maybe someone from the company?" "You know very well that I have no parents, no brothers, no sisters," Elizabeth answered him. She thought Ben was alluding to himself, but he might not have counted on it because Elizabeth couldn't trust him at that moment. She continued to hold Christopher's hand and suddenly realized, "I'll sign the company over to my husband now," she said. "That won't arouse suspicion." "But the husband is also a close relative," Ben said. Elizabeth looked at Christopher and asked him if he would be willing to take on that responsibility. Ben looked displeased. He was clearly expecting the company to go to him. Christopher didn't answer anything, just froze in one pose, as if he wanted to avoid being noticed. Either I go to prison, Elizabeth said. But if your husband doesn't want to be involved in your affairs, we can think about it, Ben added uncertainly. He agrees, Elizabeth said without looking at the assistant. Well, I guess he does, Christopher said uncertainly. It's like I don't have a choice. I will prepare all the documents and come to your house tomorrow to sign them, Ben said quickly. The assistant congratulated Elizabeth and Christopher on their anniversary, wished them a good evening, and hurried away. At last he looked very intently at Christopher. The man could not decipher the emotion that lurked in his gaze. A calm and happy continuation of the evening was out of the question. Elizabeth didn't bother to give her gift. The next morning Ben came even earlier than Elizabeth, and Christopher had time to clean up. The aide had to wait, and at breakfast they sat down together at the table. I thought a lot about what you said last night, Elizabeth said while Ben was preparing the papers. She had indeed thought about what the assistant had told her, but she didn't analyze his words. Didn't try to find a setup. Elizabeth was thinking about exactly how she could avoid the consequences. It seemed to her that simply transferring the company to her husband was not enough. Christopher and I should probably get a divorce, she said. Christopher immediately rose from his seat. Ben darted his eyes at his boss. So what do you think? Do you think the IRS employs fools? Elizabeth reasoned. They won't realize we just redid the paperwork when they smell something fishy. If we're divorced, there'll be fewer questions. Don't worry and don't do anything rash, Ben cautioned Elizabeth. First of all, we'll do it retroactively. Secondly, we need it more for the competitor than for verification. After all, he wants to deal with you specifically, not your case. Liz. I don't like this, said Christopher, who had just been standing there. I'm definitely not getting a divorce. Elizabeth sighed, waving her hand. Give me your papers, she said. Doombly, she leafed through a couple of documents, but more for the sake of appearances, she didn't even read what was written there. She had no reason not to trust Ben. They'd been working together for years. The documents are signed. The assistant put everything in a folder and promised to straighten everything out. Expect my call with good news, Ben said. Elizabeth thanked him and finally touched her cup of coffee, which had already managed to become cold. By evening, it had come to Elizabeth's attention that she hadn't gotten herself a copy of the paperwork, that the whole thing was kind of weird in general. In short, Elizabeth began to realize that she had made a mistake. She quickly grabbed her phone and texted her assistant to bring or courier her a copy of the contract. You don't look well at all, said Christopher, who was suddenly at Elizabeth's side. I suggest you have a glass of your favorite wine and calm down. He took out a bottle and a glass, quickly filled it, and handed it to his wife. Elizabeth took the drink, thanking him. She stared at one point and thought about something of her own. I think I did the stupidest thing of my life today, she said quietly and took a sip. You're just nervous, aren't you? Christopher tried to reassure her. You've been thinking about it all day, so you've been having strange thoughts. Have some wine, lie down and rest. Today is done, and tomorrow there will be other things to do. New worries, fresh thoughts. Elizabeth asked Christopher to sit down next to her. As soon as he lowered himself onto the couch, the girl laid her head on his shoulder. She was swollen from just one sip, immediately pulled to sleep. You're right. I'm so tired that I don't know what I'm thinking. My eyes are closing, Elizabeth said. Don't fight it, Christopher said, stroking her head. You need to rest. You didn't sleep much the night before. You've been on edge all day today, so take care of yourself. Elizabeth relaxed in the warm embrace of her lover, took a couple more sips, set the glass on the small table near the sofa, then returned her head to her husband's shoulder and gradually slid into his lap. Christopher continued to stroke Elizabeth's hair and tell her that everything would be all right. He was scared himself, but he held on for the sake of keeping Elizabeth from worrying even more. Someone had to keep a cool head. Elizabeth hadn't opened her eyes yet, but she already realized something was wrong. Her head ached as if she had emptied several bottles of wine last night instead of just a few sips. She didn't want to open her eyes, so Elizabeth decided to sleep a little longer. She rolled over onto her other side and froze. She realized she wasn't in her own bed because she felt a huge, hard pillow under her head. It was like the one her grandmother had in the village. Elizabeth had always thought it weighed 50 pounds and could kill someone if she wanted to. In her house, there were no such pillows in any bedroom. No sofa could have such a thing. Her cheek was stabbed and feathery. And that feeling, too, was from a distant childhood. Elizabeth remembered perfectly well how unpleasant it was to show the sharp tips of feathers through pillowcases, and she would pull them out of the fabric and examine them. And Granny would scold every time she found a pile of those feathers and fluff under the bed. Elizabeth still risked opening her eyes. She couldn't lie there forever and avoid reality. The room was dusky, but there was a glimpse of sunlight through the thick curtains, indicating that the time had definitely passed the afternoon. The girl did not realize where she was. She couldn't see the room, only a thin line of light from the window, which showed dust particles flying around the room. Elizabeth got out of bed, sliding the curtains open. Outside the window, she saw a wooden fence and a lot of bushes of some kind. It felt like she was at a country house or in a village. She even thought she heard cows mooing somewhere in the distance. Elizabeth slowly turned around in the room and guessed from the furnishings that she had actually found herself in an incomprehensible way in a poor village cottage. The room contained the bed from which the girl had risen a few minutes ago, a stove, a table with a white tablecloth, and a closet. Elizabeth did not understand anything. Never before had she been in this place. How had she ended up here in the first place? The last thing Elizabeth remembered from last night was sitting on the couch with a glass of wine and her husband Christopher beside her. There was no way she could have drunk so much to completely forget everything. Elizabeth didn't have her ID or phone with her. She stayed in the homemade clothes she had been wearing yesterday. How she had gotten to this place was unclear, but one thing was clear: she had to go home. Elizabeth walked towards the exit. When she left the room, she found herself in the kitchen, which was also a hallway. Near the door, she noticed her suitcase, immediately opened it. Inside were several things that someone had hastily left. They were not folded, they were lying in a heap. In a separate pocket lay a passport and a few other documents. Very interesting, Elizabeth stretched out. Did I run away from home or something? Apparently something happened yesterday that made me run away from home. But I couldn't reconstruct the events of the previous day at all. All I remembered was the evening by the fireplace, my head on Christopher's shoulder, and the glass in front of me. I only took a couple sips. There was no way that amount of alcohol could have caused my memory loss. Elizabeth rummaged through more of her suitcase, hoping to find a cell phone there. But there was nothing there. Without that gadget, the girl certainly wouldn't run. She couldn't imagine her life without a smartphone at all. Elizabeth stepped outside. The sunlight hurt her eyes, which were used to semi-darkness. The girl put her palm to her forehead to cover herself a little from the sun and looked around. There were several other huts nearby, as poor and dilapidated as the one in which she had awakened. Some of the huts were definitely abandoned, but the closest one was clearly inhabited. And suddenly Elizabeth noticed an old woman sitting on a bench in the yard of a neighboring house. The girl decided that she could help her. In fact, Elizabeth was very happy when she saw someone alive in the middle of nowhere. She immediately ran up to her neighbor. As she got closer, Elizabeth discovered that the neighbor was not the infirm old woman she had thought she was at first sight. It was just that she was dressed in a very rustic way that gave age. "How do you do?" Elizabeth said. "I apologize for disturbing you, but could you tell me where I am and how I came to be here?" The neighbor looked at her carefully. The woman's eyes were so pale, as if transparent. She seemed to know something, but she was in no hurry to tell. "My name is Elizabeth," she introduced herself, thinking it would help her to make the old woman feel at ease. "She's alive," after all, the neighbor suddenly said, which completely disconcerted Elizabeth. "I saw them bringing you in yesterday. I thought they were trying to close the crime. I almost called the police. But there's no cell phone service here." Elizabeth asked the woman to tell her what she'd seen, and then remembered to get the stranger's name. "My name is Mary Adams," the neighbor replied. "I suffer from insomnia. I couldn't sleep last night, and then I heard something. It was late at night. A car came to the window. The car was parked in front of the neighbor's house," said Mary. "I thought my old lady was coming back. But no. 2 men got out of the car, carried you in their arms, carried you into the house, and drove away." Elizabeth, barely able to stay on her feet, asked Mary to describe the men. "I know it was dark, but can you remember anything?" or the make of the car?" Elizabeth asked, folding her arms across her chest in a gesture of pleading. I could see clearly. They were shining their headlights so bright that half the village could see them. Mary Adams replied, describing the two men who had carried Elizabeth into the house. The girl listened to Mary and could not believe her ears, trying to find some excuses and explanations. She hoped the old woman was wrong after all, but there could be no doubt. After the neighbor described the car, Elizabeth was already sure that her husband and her assistant had brought her here. But how was that possible? Elizabeth didn't even know they knew each other. To her mind, the whole thing was just unthinkable. "Did they talk about anything?" she asked. "I can't tell you that now," Mary Adams replied. "I see well for my age, but I don't hear very well. Not even a little," the old woman said guiltily. It was impossible to hear anything. Elizabeth thanked her neighbor once again, went back to her new home. Mary Adams shouted to her that the house was abandoned, so she could stay there as long as she saw fit. "And you can come and see me. I'm the only one living here," she added. "Thanks, but I'm going into town. By the way, can you tell me how to get there?" Elizabeth stopped and asked. The girl stood at the bus stop and borrowed some money from Mary Adams for transportation. She left her things with her too, because she didn't want to carry a suitcase. All she took with her was her passport. She had to walk to her house, which was in the most remote part of the city. Her cottage was located in a place that was considered elite. It was something like a village for the rich. The only way to get there was with a pass, which Elizabeth didn't have with her, of course. But the guard at the gate let her in for old time's sake. What confused her was that he did so reluctantly. "Peter Stephen, have you already forgotten me for one night?" Elizabeth joked. But all she got in response was the guard's embarrassment and a guilty look. "You will go to the house and find out everything there. I'm forbidden to let you in, and I'll probably get a lot for disobeying orders," Peter replied after a long pause. Elizabeth did not understand anything, although she was beginning to guess. Only yesterday she had signed the papers transferring her business to her husband, and today she had been chased out of the house. The only thing she couldn't understand was why she wasn't allowed in the house. It had nothing to do with the company anymore. Elizabeth rang the bell. At the gate, the door was opened by an unfamiliar man. It was the guard. Elizabeth guessed from the uniform. "This is my house. Let me in," she said calmly. "Not true. The mistress is home now." The guard answered her. "This is the first time I've ever seen you." "No wonder, since it's the first day you've worked here." Elizabeth laughed nervously. "Get out of my way. I'm the boss." Just then Elizabeth noticed a young girl behind the guard. She was strolling across the courtyard in an icy silk robe. Elizabeth couldn't stand it. She tried to lunge at the imposter, but the guard grabbed the girl and threw her straight to the ground. "What's going on here?" Elizabeth screamed. "I'm in some parallel universe." The girl, who was strolling through the courtyard, noticed the guest, walked smoothly to the gate, and looked at Elizabeth haughtily. "This is my home now," said the stranger, smiling smugly. "And Christopher is mine at last. And you can go wherever you like, but don't set foot here again." So Elizabeth wasn't crazy. It was all Christopher's doing. That was Elizabeth's suspicion, but she couldn't understand why she didn't own the house either. The only place she could find out the truth was in her office. That's where Elizabeth decided to go. She had to walk again, because she didn't even have money for a cab. She was terrified of being kicked out of her own company, but she had to talk to her husband, no matter what it took. She approached the building where her office was located, noticing that the guards had changed there as well. When only he had time to organize all this, the girl wondered. She had already guessed that she wouldn't be allowed in here now either. But she had to talk to Christopher at any cost. She was lucky she saw that her car, which apparently didn't belong to her anymore either, had pulled into the parking lot. Christopher got out of the car, wearing a nice business suit and a very satisfied look on his face. His face showed that he felt he was the ruler of the world. "He's getting into character fast," Elizabeth thought. She ran up to the bridge, jumped on him from behind and started hitting him on the shoulders, on the head, shouting insults, while the passers-by watched with interest. The guards ran out of the building and took Elizabeth off Christopher's back. The girl, mad with anger, waved her hand at them, saying, "It's okay, he'll sort it out." But as soon as the guard let Elizabeth go, she threw herself at her husband again and began to beat him with her palms. She didn't know how to fight. She just swung her arms left and right, not even looking where she was hitting. One of the guards grabbed her by the waist, and Elizabeth continued to flail her arms and legs like a bug that has fallen on its back and can't turn over. "I understand your anger, but don't embarrass yourself," Christopher said. "Why are you driving my car? Is there a girl walking around in my house?" Elizabeth shouted. "I've already realized that you've taken the company away from me, but what does that have to do with the property?" "You should have read the documents you signed more carefully," Christopher said calmly. Elizabeth froze. She was no longer hysterical. She realized that she had signed over everything to him. She had no chance of getting anything back. "Was your mistress in the house?" she asked with a hint of contempt. "How long have you been with her?" "It doesn't matter," Christopher said. "Get out of here before they force you out. You're free to go. The divorce petition has already been filed." Elizabeth was released. She didn't throw herself. She stayed where she was and just watched her traitorous husband go to her office, where he would run her business, live in her house, and drive her car. She was so stunned by her spouse's insolence and meanness that she couldn't cry or get angry, nothing. And then she noticed Ben coming out of the office. The former assistant was obviously in a great mood, walking almost at a gallop. Elizabeth rushed over to him. "Why did you do that?" she asked, grabbing Ben by his jacket. He was scared. He hadn't expected to see his former boss. He tried to say something, but he couldn't get a complete sentence out of his mouth out of excitement. He said he didn't know anything, that it was all Christopher's plan, and he wasn't lying about the tests. They were indeed planned. "How could you not know when you brought me documents to sign that said I was giving my husband all my assets? Did you deliberately frame your speeches to confuse me as much as possible? To panic me?" "I really didn't know. They slipped me the wrong papers," Ben continued to lie. "He brought me into the house. Elizabeth came by with Christopher. Did the neighbor see you? Stop lying to me. You set this whole thing up together. By the way, why don't I remember anything?" "Guilt." I was interrupted. Ben lowered his eyes. He realized that there was no point in lying anymore. His complicity in this crime was obvious. And then behind the man's back, some girl screamed. "Oh, brother." Elizabeth recognized that voice at once. It was that thin, gentle voice that had told her hours ago that she was no longer welcome in the house. Ben's face showed that he was not happy with the situation. He didn't want his former boss to know his motives for this deception. "So that's what this is all about," Elizabeth said when she saw the girl. "It's your sister. Have you taken care of the family welfare?" "Elizabeth, you were told to leave." "Go on your way," Ben said when he realized there was no point in hiding anymore. "You can't prove anything. If you go to the police, they'll send you straight to forensics." Elizabeth didn't understand. What kind of examination would they send her to? But Ben quickly explained to her that she had blacked out the day before for a reason. The girl had already guessed that something had been spiked in her wine, and the assistant confirmed it. "The police have been alerted to your case. Unless you want to end your days in a mental institution or behind bars, you'd better not go to the police," Ben warned her. "You've done your homework," Elizabeth said through gritted teeth, clenching her fists. Ben's sister, Sandy, hid behind him because she saw Elizabeth's fighting spirit, but her brother reassured her. "Sandy, don't worry. She won't have time to hurt you. The guards are already on standby," he said. Elizabeth decided to take her almost ex-husband's advice and not embarrass herself anymore. She walked Ben and her sister to the door and then kicked her former assistant's car with all her might. Security guards immediately ran out of the office, and Elizabeth rushed out. She stopped when she had run out of strength and there was no pursuit. Elizabeth was literally gasping for breath. She had never run so much and so fast before. If she could escape from the guards, she could not escape from her own thoughts. Elizabeth realized that through her own stupidity and carelessness, she had lost everything she had earned and accumulated through years of hard work. Elizabeth sobbed. She sat upright on the ground, leaning her back against some unremarkable stall. "Girl, are you scaring my customers like this?" said the indignant stall clerk, who had been listening to Elizabeth crying and mumbling to herself for a long time. But when the woman saw Elizabeth, her mood changed. She realized that the poor girl was in trouble. She could tell by the crying. But Elizabeth looked decent, so she was trustworthy. The woman even asked if Elizabeth needed any help. "If it is not difficult to borrow $3 from me for a ticket to the village," said the girl. "I'm asking for a loan. When I have the money, I will definitely pay you back." "Take one," said the woman and handed Elizabeth a bill. "We'll pay it back, or we won't. That's another matter. At least you can buy yourself something to eat." Elizabeth was also ashamed to accept the handout, but she was in no position to refuse it. She promised herself that she would be sure to pay back Mary Adams, who had given her money for her journey from the village. With that saleswoman, she was sure she would find a way out of the hole she had fallen into through her own gullibility and foolishness. Elizabeth returned to the village. She didn't know where else to go. She had no place in the city in which to find shelter, and here some of her belongings remained, and at least one acquaintance who was willing to take in and help was sweet old Mary Adams. "Yes, the boys are very brazen these days," Mrs. Adams said, listening to Elizabeth's story of how she came to be in this village. The girl had bought the cheapest waffles and cake for her neighbor to thank her for her help. They sat in the kitchen drinking tea. Mary Adams was thinking about how she could help the unfortunate girl, and Elizabeth was thinking about how she could get out of her plight. Though she was engaged in business, she had failed to make any useful connections. The girl did not participate in dubious schemes, did not give bribes, so she could not agree with anyone. The partners did not care who ran her company, she herself or her ex-husband. Mary offered Elizabeth to stay the night at her house, but Elizabeth declined. She felt that she had already squeezed the woman too much. There was no light in the house Christopher and Ben had put her in, but Elizabeth didn't need it. She lit a candle she'd also borrowed from a neighbor. It was enough. It seemed to Elizabeth that she would not be able to sleep and would think about her problems all night. But her strength left her, and she fell asleep as soon as she put her head on the pillow. In the morning, Elizabeth decided to make some improvements to her new home. There was no telling how long she would have to spend here. She wanted to create some semblance of comfort. For the first time, she noticed the decoration of the room. The house seemed to have been abandoned not too long ago. Dust had already accumulated on the shelves, but it didn't look like it had been there for years. In the kitchen drawers, there were still packets of pasta, cereal with expiration dates that hadn't expired. The first thing Elizabeth did was dust. She decided to find a rag and suddenly noticed a note in the most prominent place in front of the front door. She assumed it was a message from her ex-husband to her. With trembling hands, she took the note, began to read it, and from the very first line she realized that the letter was not meant for her. It began with the words, "My dear daughter." Her mother had died a long time ago. She couldn't have left a note for her. But Elizabeth didn't stop reading. The letter was from the woman who owned the house to her daughter. She apologized to her, hoping that her daughter might remember her one day, maybe decide to visit. But the former owner of the house had moved away. She gave her daughter an address where she could find her, begged her to come visit her mother. Elizabeth wiped away the tear that rolled down her cheek after reading the message. So much maternal love and pain in those words written in pencil with a trembling hand. The girl wondered what had happened between mother and daughter that they had to separate and cut off contact for several years. Elizabeth could learn the truth from only one person, so she went to him. "I've been waiting for you," Mary Adams exclaimed joyfully when she saw Elizabeth on the doorstep. "I wanted to come to you to ask you to breakfast." The woman didn't seem to be lying. Her table was indeed already set. Fragrant tea, luscious cakes, pancakes, and cottage cheese. Mary Adams must have gotten up very early to prepare a treat for her new acquaintance. Elizabeth even blushed with embarrassment. "Why do you trouble yourself so much?" Elizabeth was modest. "I'm so embarrassed that I barged into your life." "I'm only glad you did," Mary Adams replied animatedly. "I'm all alone with no grandchildren or children. My neighbor left me. It's good to have you here. I feel sorry for you, though. It's not good for you at all." Mary, a little embarrassed by the last sentence, remembered how Elizabeth had cried the day before and worried that she had lost everything she had. But Elizabeth was not offended. On the contrary, she even smiled. "By the way, I wanted to ask you about your previous neighbor." Elizabeth remembered, sitting down at the table, and the dishes gave off such an appetizing aroma that she wanted to start breakfast as soon as possible. Lucy lived in that house. Immediately the memories rushed back to her mind. Mary Adams was a good woman, kind. She hadn't been gone that long, not even a year. Lucy and her daughter were unlucky. Did they fight a lot? A lot. "That's interesting to me," Elizabeth said and put the note on the table. Mary put on her glasses, picked up the letter, ran her eyes over it quickly. After reading it, she put her glasses back on the table and looked out the window. She seemed to have tears in her eyes as well. Because of such foolishness, frankly, they feared, Mary said after a long pause. Elizabeth had already managed to whip up a couple of pancakes in the meantime. Catherine is Lucy's daughter. She found a young man in town who wasn't young at all and was about 15 years older, probably. But rich. Lucy did not accept such a son-in-law. They called her daughter all sorts of names. But she and her fiancé had come to visit together. That was the last time Catherine visited her mother, and she told her not to show her face here. Elizabeth set aside the pies and pancakes, listened intently to the story. The girl had lost her mother early. She couldn't imagine how one could choose a groom between a fiancé and a family member. Elizabeth could not condemn either mother or daughter. It seemed to her that a compromise should have been made, but it was easy to reason when the situation didn't concern you. Anyway, after a few months, Lucy regretted everything she'd said. The daughter did not answer the phone and did not come to visit, finished the story Mary Adams. And then Lucy decided to move to the city. Hoped that at least there she will have the opportunity to meet with her daughter. But where Catherine went, she didn't know. So now I don't know if they ever met. "Somehow I'm dying to know," Elizabeth said suddenly. "I have the address. I'll go and ask. And at the same time I'll confess that I've taken over her house." Elizabeth was telling the truth. The thought occurred to her as soon as she read the letter. She wanted to hug the poor woman and feel sorry for her. But she didn't have enough money for the journey. The town was farther away from the village than the one Elizabeth lived in. Therefore, the ticket would cost more. But Mary Adams offered to help her again. Elizabeth was embarrassed, but she would not refuse. The girl was still sure that she would not be in this predicament forever. One day she would have the opportunity to pay back everyone who was helping her. Elizabeth went to Lucy's the next morning. She was ready to go earlier, but the bus left only once a day in the early morning. The girl wondered on the way what she would say to the woman, why she had even considered this trip. But the bus was already pulling up to the train station. It was too late to change her mind. It took Elizabeth about 2 hours to find the right address, and now she stood in front of the door to Lucy's apartment. She tentatively pressed the bell, but it didn't work. Elizabeth already thought that this was a sign that she should go back to the village and continue to think about her own problems, and not solve other people's. But no, she hadn't come all this way just to be scared and come back with nothing. Elizabeth still didn't know why she had come here in the first place or what she would say. But she knocked on the door. No one opened, though Elizabeth knocked several times, and for quite a while. She even thought she heard footsteps outside the door, but no one ever opened. Just as Elizabeth turned around, there was a thud in the apartment, as if something or someone had fallen. There was no doubt about it, the sound came from behind the door behind her. Elizabeth couldn't leave, so she risked opening the door to see if anything was wrong in the apartment and if she needed help. The knob came down and the lock opened. Elizabeth pushed the door open and immediately saw a woman on the floor in the hallway. She seemed to be having a stroke. The girl was frightened. She didn't even have a cell phone to call an ambulance. But Lucy pointed to the kitchen. Elizabeth immediately went where the woman showed her and saw a smartphone on the table. The ambulance came 10 minutes later. Elizabeth went with Lucy to the hospital, spent about an hour in the corridor until the doctor came out to her. "She's fine," the doctor said. "You called the paramedics just in time." Elizabeth breathed a sigh of relief, and then the doctor said that they had already spoken to the patient's daughter. They told her that an unknown girl had come to the hospital. Catherine said she'd be here within the hour. She asked you to wait for her, the doctor said. "I'll wait for her," the doctor said. "I'll wait for her," Elizabeth replied calmly. She had nowhere to be in a hurry. She thought it would be a great opportunity to reconcile mother and daughter. She was even glad that Katie had decided to come after all. She didn't ignore her mother's problems. So it wasn't too late. Katie arrived quickly, less than an hour later. She ran straight to Elizabeth and knelt down in front of her. "Don't be. That's what anyone in my position would do," Elizabeth said, embarrassed. "The doctor said you saved Mom's life," Katie said, getting up from her knees. "I don't know who you are or how you know my mom, but I'm grateful to you. Ask for anything you want." "Come on, I don't need anything. Will you forgive your mother?" Elizabeth said, and handed her the letter she had found in the house. "I didn't go to your mother's house of my own free will. There was this note. It was meant for you, I take it?" Catherine took the sheet, read her mother's message, which had been waiting for almost a year in her home. She couldn't hold back her tears as she read the words written in neat handwriting. Elizabeth noticed the look of guilt, shame, and unspeakable pain in Katie's eyes. "How could I have forgotten about her? She could have died alone," Katie said, sinking down on the bench beside Elizabeth. "But how did you end up in her house and apartment?" The doctor reported that Mama had been taken from the city apartment, not the village. Elizabeth was ashamed to admit that she had moved into Lucy's house without her knowledge. But she saw Kathy as a good and kind person who would certainly not judge her. So Elizabeth decided to tell her the whole story from the beginning, so that Katie would have no more questions for her. "It was an accident of fate," Catherine said when Elizabeth had finished her story. "Stay the night at your mother's in the village. You can't leave tonight anyway, and she will be in the hospital for weeks. Tomorrow morning I will come to visit you and we will talk." Elizabeth thanked the kind girl. She really hadn't thought at all about where she would stay. The buses traveled once a day, not only to the city but also from the city. So she could either walk to the village, which would take her a long time, or take a cab, which Elizabeth simply didn't have the money for. Catherine not only allowed her mother's savior to stay with her, but drove her to the familiar driveway. "I'll be there at 9, Katie said goodbye. "I hope you won't be asleep by then." Elizabeth re-entered the apartment she had been in for only a few minutes. She found it cozy, but everything about it suggested that it belonged to a lonely and deeply unhappy woman. There were many framed photographs on the shelves. Each picture was of Catherine at a different time in her life. On one was a baby, on another a first grader with puffy bows, on the third already a graduate in a beautiful ball gown. Lucy loved her daughter and missed her in a strange apartment. It wasn't easy for Elizabeth to get comfortable. She had to get used to the idea that she had no corner of her own now. The girl thought a lot about Catherine, what she wanted to talk to her about, but there was no point in guessing. The only thing left to do was to wait until morning to see if Catherine had been deceived. Catherine knocked on the door at exactly 9 o'clock in the morning. Elizabeth was surprised that the girl knocked. She was not the mistress of the house, so Catherine could have entered her house unannounced. But Elizabeth even asked permission to enter and clarified exactly where they could set up to talk. "Mother is feeling better and would like to thank you," Catherine said as she sat down at the table in the kitchen. Elizabeth poured tea, but there was nothing else she could offer her guest. She even took the tea bag without asking. "If you don't mind, we'll go to the hospital after we talk," Catherine said. "Of course, I also have to thank your mother after all to get to know her. I'm her lodger." It turned out that Catherine was floundering, did not know how to get to what she wanted to talk about. Elizabeth guessed that Lucy wasn't the topic of conversation. "I remember you telling me your story yesterday," Catherine began to say. "You were running a successful business, and I found some articles about you on the internet. It's amazing that a businesswoman like you could be so foolishly deceived." "I trusted both Ben and my husband," Elizabeth replied, feeling an inexplicable sense of guilt. "I was just intimidated and confused. They were people I didn't expect to be set up at all." "Don't think I'm trying to shame you or make fun of you," Catherine said, as she realized that her words might have sounded like mockery. "Quite the opposite. I would like to discuss some details with you. I have a proposition for you that you'll like, especially given the position you're in." Elizabeth raised her head and squared her shoulders. Her whole appearance showed that she was ready to listen to the terms and offers. Catherine immediately saw in front of her a strong woman, a real businesswoman. Until then, Elizabeth seemed to her as a lost girl. But her ex-husband and assistant could not bury in her a confident businesswoman. I wasn't, and I'll be honest about it, Catherine said. Before voicing her proposal, or even a request, Catherine told the backstory. She admitted that she married a man who was 18 years older than her. Mary Adams got it a little wrong, but she entered into marriage for love. Catherine also revealed that this was the reason why she and her mom had a fight. Elizabeth was silent about the fact that she was already aware that she was the cause of discord between mother and daughter. 2 months ago, my husband passed away, Catherine said sadly. No sooner had I recovered from this loss, although not yet, to be honest, as I had to face a new problem, the heirs. Other than our mutual son, only 3 years old, my spouse had no children. His business is passed to me. But I don't understand anything about it. I am afraid that I too could be cheated by assistants and accountants and other employees. Anybody could set me up because I don't understand anything about the paperwork. So I would be very happy if you would become my right hand. Teach me how to run the business and help me get the company out. Because with me at the helm, my late husband's company is going downhill. Elizabeth was pleased that Catherine had decided to entrust her with such a responsible task, even knowing that she herself was dressed like a little girl. She even asked Catherine if she was embarrassed by that fact. Not at all, Catherine replied calmly. You've been running a successful business for several years. I read that you built your company from scratch. Why can't you promote an established and successful business? Personal motives played into your business. You were deceived by people close to you. I have a different situation. I'd be happy to help you. Elizabeth agreed. Catherine hugged her new acquaintance, thanked her for this answer, offered Elizabeth to immediately give an advance payment so that she could rent an apartment, settle in for the first time, buy food, new clothes. After the conversation, the girls went to Lucy's hospital, where the woman tearfully thanked Elizabeth for saving her life. But she was even more grateful for reconciling with her daughter. After her first day of work, which was Elizabeth's abbreviated day, she drove to the village. The purpose of the trip was one thing: to talk to Mary Adams, to settle her debts. Elizabeth couldn't even figure out what Mary Adams was happier about: the fact that her new neighbor had done well and found a job, or that Lucy had reconciled with her daughter. The woman did not want to accept money from Elizabeth, but she said she would be offended and would not forgive herself if Mary did not accept her debt. Elizabeth also wanted to visit the stall clerk, who was also kind to her. But she had to go to another town for that, not the one where she had settled. Now she didn't want to spend half a day on the bus, so Elizabeth decided that she would thank her when she bought a car. By the way, she was able to do so after 6 months. All in all, in the entire 6 months, Elizabeth had almost completely recovered from her collapse. She became not just an assistant and business consultant for Catherine, she became the second person in her company. The girls were able to not only save the business, but powerfully propel it forward. Catherine was well aware that without Elizabeth's help she could not have done it, and therefore generously thanked the girl with a high salary. Elizabeth had not lost her entrepreneurial spirit. She tried not to waste a lot of money. After she bought an apartment and a car, she started saving for her own business. It was not the first time she started from scratch. She'd already managed to start a business once and create a successful construction firm. So she would do it again. It took the girl 3 years to get back on her feet. She was still a long way from her previous fortune, but last time it had taken her years to get her business off the ground. Now, however, things were progressing much faster. Elizabeth did not forget Mary Adams and the saleswoman, who had been kind to her. She had paid off the second one too, and they had even managed to chat. The woman at the stall was named Tatiana, and she told her that she was deeply unhappy. Her own son had died in a hot spot, and she was all alone. Elizabeth had no idea how many lonely women there were in the world. She thought about the fact that there was no one to take care of them. For example, Mary Adams complained that she herself had to chop wood for the winter, shovel snow, go for water. It is not good for an old woman to do such hard labor. When Elizabeth had her own business and money, she thought about creating a foundation. The girl found volunteers who agreed to help old people and single women with hard physical labor on a free basis. The news of such a fund quickly spread around the city. Elizabeth was even interviewed for the regional channel. Christopher got up early to prepare for the meeting. The company wasn't doing as well as Elizabeth. He was nervous. The partners were refusing to cooperate. If at first no one cared who was at the helm of Elizabeth's company, after a while they realized that there was a difference. Christopher had never been a businessman, and things were not going well for him. He couldn't get organized on one level of his company. There was no way Ben could single-handedly pull the firm off the bottom, and so far they were still afloat. But the outlook for the next few years was bleak. Added to the fact that Christopher not only didn't know how to earn money, he spent it recklessly. And he had an assistant in the form of Sandy. This young beauty didn't worry about money at all. The money from her card, and consequently from Christopher's accounts, flew away like leaves from trees in the fall. Christopher had a habit of eating breakfast with the news. It was a habit he'd had since his days at the car service center. He brewed his coffee, set a plate of freshly cooked scrambled eggs in front of him, and turned up the volume on the TV. Just as he took the first sip of the aromatic, invigorating coffee, the drink immediately spurted out in a fountain onto the table. The thing was, he saw a familiar face on the TV. Elizabeth, in an expensive suit, beautifully styled and wearing expensive jewelry, was talking about her charitable foundation. She was definitely doing well. After the interview, the announcer talked about how Elizabeth is a successful entrepreneur and is already moving the local rich people from the top position. How is that possible? I ripped her off. Christopher said out loud, "If a man has brains, he is not lost in the world," said Sandy, who had just woken up to the smell of coffee. "That can't be said for you." Christopher was furious when he heard his lover's words. He reminded her that she wasn't exactly frugal either and had contributed significantly to their ruin. "I thought you were going to be a businessman," she said unashamedly. "Money is supposed to work and multiply itself, and for some reason you have only disadvantages. You should learn from your ex." The man could not stand such insults and obvious mockery from the girl, grabbed her by the hair and pushed her out into the street right in her pajamas. She shrieked, begging to be let go, but Christopher couldn't stop. She had hurt him too much with her remarks. Christopher was already thinking that his mistress had stopped seeing boundaries. More than once she had made insulting remarks about Christopher, especially if she didn't have enough money for new jewelry or dresses. Sandy could only demand and judge. It was impossible to get support and help from her. "Come to my place and get your sister out of here," Christopher told Ben over the phone. "What do you mean, take her away?" Ben didn't understand. "Literally, I don't need her anymore. I'm going back to my wife, and Sandy's standing outside the fence in her pajamas. And the longer you drive, the longer she'll have to walk down the street in God's pajamas." Christopher replied and hung up the phone. He wasn't joking or speaking in haste. He really intended to get Elizabeth back. He couldn't handle the business alone. The money would soon run out, and Elizabeth was obviously doing well. He thought that his ex-wife would immediately forgive him and take him back. All the more reason for him to return everything to her, provided she agreed to remarry him. Before leaving for another city, Christopher thought that Ben might harm him in some way. So he decided to fire the assistant and informed him about it by phone. "You realize that without me, the end of your empire will come even faster." Ben answered him, who was also furious that his sister had been thrown out on the street like an unwanted kitten. "Don't worry, my ex-wife will fix my affairs," Christopher answered, starting the engine. "She would have fired you anyway. No one would want to work with a traitor." He hung up. Ben looked at his sister, who still couldn't get warm in the car. Did he seriously think Elizabeth would forgive him and welcome him back with open arms? Sandy asked through gritted teeth. "No, of course not. She's not stupid," Ben told her. "But we can try to gain her trust and punish the bastard." "What city does she live in now? Did you see it on the news?" Sandy nodded. Ben smiled and stepped on the gas. He and his sister are going to Elizabeth's place too. Just need to change their sister's clothes first. Ben decided that the mistress shouldn't be taken to see Elizabeth. She would be more able to confide in him without her. Sandy didn't insist. She didn't feel like traveling across town, but she advised her brother to call Elizabeth, because Christopher would definitely be there sooner. Elizabeth enjoyed the beautiful morning. Even though it was getting close to lunchtime, she'd given herself a chance to get some sleep that day. She and Catherine had had a party the night before to celebrate a successful transaction. The peaceful flow of the morning routine was broken by a phone call. Elizabeth had hoped to hear anyone but the man who had left her in the lurch a few years ago. "Ben?" Elizabeth said questioningly. "Did you get the wrong number?" "No. I want to warn you that another man from the past is coming to see you soon," the man said seriously, though his knees were trembling with excitement. "Your ex-husband has found out you're back on the horse and wants to suck on your income. Christopher himself couldn't replicate your success. He's almost out of money." Elizabeth replied that's what she thought. But Ben is worried for nothing. The girl would never forgive her ex-husband in her life, would never believe him. "I understand that." Unlike him, he laughed. "You want to get back at him, don't you? I have an idea." "I'm not surprised you have another plan to trick a man." Elizabeth's former assistant jabbed at him as well. "What I don't understand is, why would you want to do that? I mean, you two are kind of related, and even related." And Ben told him what Christopher had done to him and his sister. So he had a strong motive for revenge, too. Elizabeth still agreed to listen to his plan. She found his arguments convincing. Elizabeth was also attracted to the fact that this time her safety would not be threatened. So this wasn't another scheme to take everything away from her. Elizabeth was even looking forward to hearing from her ex-husband. There was no way Christopher could think of a way for him to show up. He wanted to make sure his ex-spouse didn't guess his intentions, as if he didn't know she was rich again. Christopher tracked Elizabeth down, finding out where she lived and worked. As if by chance, he found himself in the same establishment where Elizabeth got her coffee every morning. "What meeting?" Christopher exclaimed, meeting Elizabeth there. Yes, unexpected indeed, Elizabeth played along, who had long known that her husband was tracking her. The guards had already reported to her a few days ago that a man was following her. Christopher asked Elizabeth how she was doing, telling her that he was doing fine except for his love life. "Wow, your mistress only wanted money." Elizabeth ironically repeated after him. "Is this boomerang coming back to you?" "It's not true, I wasn't with you for money." Christopher answered her resentfully. "Ben and his little sister tricked me. She seduced me, and he put me up to it." Elizabeth nodded, looking understanding. It looked very exaggerated, and Christopher could see the obvious mockery on his ex-wife's part. Nevertheless, he was pleased that she did not stop talking to him, listened immediately, and even entered into a dialogue. All of this Elizabeth had done deliberately. She needed to gain his trust so that Christopher would think she had fallen for his bait again. And she succeeded. After the first meeting, Christopher was sure that after a couple more conversations and dates, he would be a rich woman's husband again. And Elizabeth was happy to play along. Each time she forced herself to communicate with her ex-husband, but she realized that without it, her revenge would not happen. She needed to feign trust and warmth toward a man she couldn't stand. Listening to Christopher's words was simply unbearable for her. She realized that he was a masterful liar, and believe her, he really wanted to deceive. Even though she knew that every word he said was a lie. Christopher was getting more and more turned on because he couldn't tell if Elizabeth trusted him or not. It seemed to him that everything was happening too easily. Immediately, his ex-wife agreed to a date, answered his phone instantly. Was she so starved for a relationship, so lonely that she forgave him so easily? Christopher went on the offensive, sending her gifts, arranging surprises, dates. He thought she was about to melt. Elizabeth stepped over herself when she went to these meetings and smiled sweetly at her traitor husband. She was even more disgusted when she saw Christopher cowering before her, the bastard squealing. "Ben, I'm getting tired of these meetings with my ex-husband. When do we move on to the next phase of the plan?" Elizabeth asked him after another date. "We need to push Christopher into action. Until he's ready to give it all back to you, we're not going to get anywhere," Ben told her. "How do you push him to do that?" "I'm already pretending to be in love and forgiving all the wrongs," Elizabeth clarified. Next to Elizabeth at that moment was Catherine. She came to visit her to discuss personal matters. The girls had become not only business partners, but also best friends. "I have an idea," Catherine said suddenly. Elizabeth immediately put the call on speaker so that Ben could hear her. Men are most afraid of competition. If Christopher found out that Elizabeth had a suitor for his heart, he would immediately move into decisive action. Ben agreed that it was a good idea. As a man, he confirmed it. Katie then informed him that she had a good acquaintance who would agree to help her. Christopher didn't know how to propose to Elizabeth himself. He still doubted that she had finally forgiven him. Suddenly, he received a call on his work phone. Since Ben had been fired, Christopher scheduled all negotiations and meetings by himself. He received a call from a man who introduced himself as a well-known investor, and Christopher knew his name. It was a man named David. This was a weighty figure in their field. Many people knew him, and everyone dreamed of working with this man. Christopher even straightened his back, although the person on the phone still couldn't see him. Christopher prepared for the meeting with the investor as carefully as for a date. Until the last moment, he didn't believe that the David he had in mind would come to the meeting. But his expectations were justified. After a short negotiation, the businessmen shook hands, but David was in no hurry to leave. "Is it true that Elizabeth Agorevna is your ex-wife?" David suddenly asked. Christopher nodded and immediately tensed. This question did not bode well. David said that a friend of his was interested in the woman. He begged me to find out if Elizabeth had a boyfriend, David said, blushing. "I'm sorry to bring it up." "That's all right," Christopher coughed. "It's good of you to ask. Elizabeth and I are discussing the possibility of starting a family right now. I want to propose to her because our feelings are back." "That's too bad, because my friend was going to take her out tonight," David said. "But then I'll tell him he has nothing to look forward to." "Yes, please do." Christopher's voice became high, like a frightened boy's. Christopher waited until David left the restaurant and immediately called Elizabeth, asking her not to plan anything for the evening. He had a serious conversation to have. Wow, that worked so fast. Elizabeth was surprised. She knew at once that Christopher had prepared a serious conversation. He had dressed like a real groom, prepared a huge bouquet, and was very excited. Elizabeth sank into a chair and showed that she was ready to listen to him. Christopher pulled some papers out of his briefcase, got down on one knee, and handed Elizabeth the ring. "I want it all back," he said, to prove that he was serious. "I have prepared the documents that will give you everything back, everything that I took away. You will be my wife again." Elizabeth did not hurry to take the ring, open the folder with the documents, read them carefully, every line, every word. When she was sure that this time there was no deceit, she put her signature in the right places. "When did you have time to prepare them?" She was surprised. "But I was on my way to you with them," Christopher said. "You can see the date I wrote and signed them. It shows that I'm serious." While Elizabeth read the papers, Christopher remained on one knee with his arm outstretched. He was very worried. But since the girl signed the papers, then the deed is done. "It's a shame that you're giving me back much less than you took," Elizabeth began to say. And Christopher immediately realized that he was too happy too soon. "And I gave you the company in a very different state of mind. But thank you for that. You can offer your ring to Sandy. I don't need anything else from you, if that's what it takes. I'll make a deal with the police, just like you did. I was wiser this time." Elizabeth took the folder with the documents, got up from the table and left the restaurant. Christopher remained sitting on one knee. He could not believe his ears. He now found himself in Elizabeth's shoes. She had tricked him too. A waiter approached Christopher, asking if he wanted to pay the bill. "What bill?" yelled at the kid, furious. "Didn't you see that? Didn't she just take everything from me? How am I supposed to pay for it?" The waiter was startled by this reaction, but kept his cool. He asked the man to calm down and told him that he would have to call security, and maybe even the police if Christopher didn't pull himself together and pay for his order. But he had no intention of calming down. Christopher was furious. He was realizing more and more every second that he had literally become a tramp. He threw all sorts of unflattering words at Elizabeth, who could no longer hear him. He started smashing everything, breaking chairs, tables, and sweeping dishes from the tables of other visitors. But he was quickly calmed down and tied up by the guards. "Christopher, why did you embarrass yourself like that?" "You are a respectable man," said the owner of the restaurant. While the bound Christopher and the staff waited for the police, the man's words echoed in Christopher's mind. He remembered how, years ago, he had asked Elizabeth to calm down and not embarrass herself by throwing her fists at him in the middle of the street. He could understand her pain now, her feelings. Only the girl was much more hurt and offended. She had been robbed of her hard-earned blood and sweat, and he had been robbed of something that had never belonged to him. It was cold and calculated revenge, and Christopher accepted defeat. He decided that now he would definitely settle down, go back to his car service. He could try on a rich life and realize that money doesn't just fall out of the sky. He had everything, but he couldn't save it. When Elizabeth walked out of the restaurant, she raised the folder above her head and shouted with joy. And in the car already waiting for her was Katie, who immediately ran out of the car, hugged her friend. The girls went to celebrate their victory in the club. On the way to the club, Elizabeth called Ben and told him that the deed was done. Christopher was left with nothing, and she got back all her own. The man was pleased with the outcome, even venturing to ask if Elizabeth would hire him again. "No, I've had enough of this once," Elizabeth laughed. "I am grateful for your help. I can send you some money to thank you and pay you for your work, for warning me, but you can't expect more than that. I'm sorry, once a man has betrayed you, you can't trust him." "Only enough talk," exclaimed a happy Katie. We were already at the club. Elizabeth said goodbye, hung up the phone, and looked at the huge building with its thousands of lights on. She had never been to such places, but her friend reassured her that it was a decent place and only rich people vacationed there. And there David was waiting for them. Elizabeth did not know about it. She did not even communicate with him. This Catherine agreed about everything with her friend, and the meeting at the club was organized by her at David's request. The man had long been interested in this young, successful businesswoman. He himself was also young and attractive, but had no success in his personal life. All the girls who literally hung around his neck did not seem worthy to him. Many needed money. Their behavior was not distinguished by modesty. And David wanted to find a decent girl, whom he would see as his future wife and mother of his children. Elizabeth seemed to him just like that, and he fell in love with her at first sight. David later admits to Elizabeth that he could hardly hold a conversation with her ex-husband. He disliked liars and cheaters so much, but when he looked at Christopher and realized that this man had caused a lot of pain to this beautiful girl, the urge to punch him in the face was self-inflicted. Catherine didn't bother to tell Elizabeth that David was actually interested in her friend. The girl wasn't sure if her buddy was ready for a relationship. She hadn't promised David anything except that she would introduce them. And the introduction was a success. Elizabeth was in a good mood, smiling, almost bouncing with happiness. And David just couldn't contain his smile as he watched such a happy and therefore even more beautiful Elizabeth. "I owe you one," Elizabeth said happily to David. "How did you manage to convince my ex-husband that I had a boyfriend and he signed everything back over to me the same day?" "Men don't like competition," David answered her with a smile. "But I wasn't lying about your suitor. I do have one." David blushed, but because of the darkness in the club, Elizabeth didn't notice it. The confident, successful man who runs a dozen businesses felt at that moment like a schoolboy shy of talking to a girl. Elizabeth danced and behaved casually, not even realizing that her interlocutor was burning with shame and shaking with embarrassment. "Then introduce me to him. What if this is my destiny?" Elizabeth laughed, who was in a great mood, and said it not seriously, more as a joke. But David literally blossomed before her eyes. When he heard these words, Elizabeth, he began to correct his jacket and hair, and then extended his hand to the girl. Elizabeth stopped dancing at this metamorphosis. She looked at David seriously, trying to determine whether she understood correctly what would happen next. "Then let me introduce myself. I am the admirer," he said with contrived importance. It looked ridiculous again, because the man was terribly shy. He tried to give the impression of a serious man, but his excitement was getting in the way. Elizabeth was confused at this point, but she shook his hand. David was a handsome man, and outwardly Elizabeth was attracted to him. But the girl did not think about serious and non-serious relationships. It seemed to her that after her first marriage, she would remain a loner forever. Catherine watched from the side how her friend and old comrade communicate. She really wanted Elizabeth to find her happiness, and she knew for a fact that David was the perfect match. He would definitely not be with Elizabeth for the money. He is a loyal and decent man. Those were the arguments she made to her friend the next day. Elizabeth embarrassed. She too was well aware of what an important and powerful businessman David was. She couldn't believe she could be looked up to by a man of such high rank. "And you're not an ordinary girl," either Katie told her. "There's nothing to be surprised about. Give David a chance, you'll never meet anyone like him again." And Elizabeth heeded her friend's advice. She went on a few dates with David, accepted gifts and advances from him, and eventually they formed a beautiful couple. A year and a half later, Elizabeth and David became a family. Elizabeth did meet Christopher. It was unexpected. She had a flat tire somewhere on the outskirts of town, namely near a tire shop. Elizabeth even laughed that the owners of the tire shop had put something on the road just to get a customer. Never before had there been such an expensive car in this godforsaken place. Unfortunately, the owner's only employee was a half-drunk Christopher. Elizabeth recognized him immediately and said she wouldn't let him near the car. She called David and asked him to come and get her and the car. But while she waited for her husband, she decided to talk to Christopher. He told her without much enthusiasm that he had been working at the place since he was released from the police. After the debauch in the restaurant, he lived in a dormitory, and the only joy in his life was a bottle of vodka. Christopher watched with hatred and envy as Elizabeth got into David's car and they drove off to their happy life. "To each his own," Christopher said, his voice hoarse with hangover. "And we haven't lived rich. There's no reason to start."
"Where did you get this?" Veronica asked her daughter. She lost the power of speech for a moment, but when she tried to pull herself together, her tongue continued to disobey, and the woman's legs were shaking. She sat down on the couch, looking in horror at the gift Selena had given her. "Bought at the flea market," the girl replied, placing a vase of snow-white peonies on the table with her beloved mother's gift. The girl turned around and saw that her mother had opened the box and looked at its contents with an incomprehensible look. "And what happened? What's inside, Mom?" Sitting down next to her mother, she began to look at the gift. The day before, Selena had not had time to look at it properly. The wooden casket was quite old, and all of its surfaces were carved. It looked like it had once been decorated with stones, but now there were only empty hollows. "Why are you so scared?" Mom asked Celine. "I thought you would like my gift. You love all sorts of vintage things." "Daughter, look what's inside," Veronica said in a stony voice. The girl took the box from her mother's hands and looked inside. There were pictures. Taking a closer look, Selena looked at her mother incomprehensibly. They were pictures of her father, who had died in a car accident 10 years ago. But the most amazing thing was that the girl had never seen such pictures before. They were fresh photos, taken recently. How can this be, if her father has been resting in the grave for 10 years? "So Dad is alive?" she asked her mother. "I don't understand anything either," replied Veronica, "but one thing is clear. The photos were taken after his death, however unbelievable it may sound. But I was at the funeral with you. I saw how the coffin with your father's body was lowered into the grave. How you cried. Throwing a clod of earth into the grave. How could he have gotten out of there and come back to life?" "We have to figure it all out," Mom said. "And who did you buy it from?" Selena told her mother how she walked from the institute the usual way through the bazaar, where the inhabitants were selling various junk. She was immersed in her thoughts, as it was the last academic year of the university. The institute was noisy. Students gathered in clusters in the corridors, sharing news and plans. Selena stood at the window with her friend Catherine and her boyfriend Ivan. She hadn't seen the young man all summer. He was away on a job. Selena and Evan had been friends since high school. As a boy, Evan fell in love with Selena and even enrolled in the same institute with her to always be close to her. Last year, he offered her to live together. Inherited from his grandmother, the guy got a small studio apartment. Housing could not be called very comfortable and prestigious, but the apartment was near the institute, and Selena's family lived on the outskirts, from which it took more than an hour to get there. But recently, they began to have frequent conflicts and misunderstandings. Evan became friends with guys and girls from the oil faculty. Most of them were from rich families, very well dressed, always had money. In an effort to fit in with his friends, Evan started working more than studying. Selena had to do his notes for him to solve problems. She reassured herself. Even works so that we have something to live on. He does it all for our happiness and well-being. Selena herself took freelance orders, working online on an old laptop she bought off the shelf. Listen, when I left, you were wearing that sweater. The guy said to Selena, I came back. You're wearing it again. You couldn't buy yourself some new clothes over the summer. Selena tried to justify herself. She didn't like Evan saying such things in front of her friend. You work, take more orders. The guy insisted on his rightness. You know that Selena didn't know what to say. The guy's words hurt her in her heart. Was it her fault that her family was in such distress? Was it her fault? Come on, change something in yourself, or I'm beginning to think that soon you'll go back to your mother in your hovel. Don't embarrass me in front of my friends. They make fun of me almost every day. I'm ashamed to even bring you into my company, and all the boys come there in pairs. Selena looked at Evan with bitter resentment. The guy she'd known since childhood had changed a lot over the summer. The change in him was not for the better. She realized more and more clearly that she didn't want to be around the man who said such hurtful words to her, who didn't want to understand the plight of her family and what she was trying to earn as best she could. Seeing how offended Selena, Catherine decided to interrupt this unpleasant conversation. Let's go and look at the schedule of lectures, she suggested to her friend. Probably already posted on the first floor in the hall. Let's go and look at the lecture schedule, she suggested to her friend. It's probably already posted on the first floor in the hall. Catherine took Selena by the hand, dragged her towards the stairs. On the way, she said, Well, your Evan's got a nerve. Such words to say such words. How can he only turn his tongue? He's from a simple family, and now he's playing the big boys. Selena didn't want to have this conversation. She didn't like it at all. She walked like a robot, not thinking about anything. Having rewritten the schedule into notebooks, the girls left the building of the institute. The weather outside was beautiful. It was called Golden Autumn. In the park, the yellow-red leaves of maples rustled under their feet. The air had that transparency that only happens in September. Do you need a ride? Catherine asked her friend. She knew that Selena would take more than an hour to get home. From the expression on the girl's face, Catherine understood. Today in Vanya's apartment, she will not go. No, I'll take the bus, then walk. Selena refused. The weather is great. No rain. I want to walk, think. Well then, see you tomorrow. Catherine kissed Selena on the cheek and went to the parking lot, where her new car was parked. Her friend had recently passed her driver's license, and her parents had bought her a car as a present. Catherine had offered Selena a ride, a trip to the countryside, to the river, but she had always refused. She was always busy. Selena walked down the street, unnoticeably approached a small bazaar where people were selling things, furniture, various household items. They were doing it for different reasons. Some people didn't need these things anymore, and others brought them to the flea market to get some money to live on. That's how almost all the things from their house ended up here. Mom sold something every day to feed her son and daughter. Dad died when the children were young. Selena had just started school in Harvey. You didn't know, and now you know, one of the strangers said angrily. So you have to pay it back, or do you want your children to disappear one day? He looked meaningfully at Harvey, who was playing cards on the floor, and at Selena, who had come out of the kitchen at the noise. Leave now, Mom said. I barely had enough money to bury my husband, and I had to borrow. I have no money to pay my debts, especially since I didn't take anything from me personally. It doesn't matter. The man approached Veronica, took her by the throat, breathing nastily in her face. You'll pay it back like a sweetheart, otherwise we'll burn down your apartment. The frightened woman closed the door behind the strangers, sat down on the sofa, wrapping her arms around her head. She didn't know what to do. Lately, her husband had been missing all the time. Later, she learned that he plays cards in the casino. For these purposes, takes loans and borrows in dubious offices. What are you doing? Veronica said to her husband, You're going to get us into the world. But Selena's father continued to play, again and again borrowed money, and then he died. The accident happened on a country highway. After examining the scene, the investigator told Veronica, According to preliminary data, your husband failed to control himself on the slippery road from the rain, flew into the oncoming traffic lane. His car overturned several times and plummeted off the bridge into the river. The car was pulled out, but the man's body was not found. Most likely, he was swept away by the current. They searched for 2 months, but all was in vain. There was a sewage treatment plant downriver. If Veronica's husband's body had gotten there, it was impossible to find him. First, he was reported missing, and then they determined a different status, issuing documents that Selena's father had died. The first thing the girl's mother did when their apartment was left by the collectors, called the parking lot and asked if she could take her husband's car, which was there until the end of the investigation. She was allowed to do so. The mother sold the car for a small amount of money. When strange men came to their apartment again, she handed them a wad of bills. One of the strangers counted it and spoke through his teeth. "It's good that you tried to find money, but here is only the smallest part. Collect more, we'll be back soon. And don't you dare leave the city, we will still find you." The frightened woman put an ad in the newspaper to sell their country house. The cottage was in a great location and was expensive. Married, they built it together. The 2-story structure on a plot of 15 acres was the family's vacation spot. Here they went for the summer, so that the children could eat fresh vegetables and berries from the beds, which were carefully tended by Veronica. After selling the dacha, she again gave the money to the collectors, and a month later the woman sold a 4-room apartment in the center, bought a small apartment in an old house on the outskirts. Only this money was not enough, so from the house were sold almost all things, including services, chandeliers, furniture, even was sold some clothes. But collectors again and again demanded money. Veronica's husband owed a fabulous amount. Sometimes the woman cried, "You lie there, in the grave and do not puff, and we went to the world, completely without anything left. Soon we will have nothing to feed our children," she bitterly and resentfully addressed her husband who had passed away. Having found out that her husband was playing cards and borrowing money, she tried to stop him many times. "Stop going to the casino, it will not end well," but her husband did not listen to her. In the end, Veronica gave up on him. Her children were more important to her. Harvey was just born, needed care and nutrition, and Selena went to school. Every evening with her had to study, do homework. Selena's sad thoughts were interrupted by a squeaky female voice. "Girl, buy a jewelry box." The girl looked at the elderly woman who was holding out a handmade wooden item to her. "Why do I need it?" Selena asked. "You give it to the dearest person, and he will thank you for it." Selena didn't know what the old woman was talking about, but she remembered that today was her mother's anniversary. They were not going to celebrate. The family had no extra money for birthday celebrations. But the girl's mom loved antique things, so Selena looked closely at the box. The elderly woman held the girl's hand. Her touch was unpleasant, chilled her heart, and goosebumps ran along her skin. Celine wanted to get rid of the grandmother as soon as possible. She sensed something scary in the old woman's eyes, something disturbing, inexplicable. She tried to pull her hand out, but the woman held it tightly. "This box will reveal a secret to you." What's she talking about? She's crazy, Selena thought. But the girl remembered how her mother had once stood on this spot and asked passersby to buy things from her. Maybe the grandmother has nothing to eat, so she carries things to the bazaar from home to get some money for food. Only this thought made Selena agree to buy the box. "All right," she said to the old woman, "but I don't have much money, and you must be asking a lot." "I'll take as much as you give me," she replied. The girl took out a purse from her purse, took out a few bills, and gave them to the grandmother. The woman gave her the box in return. "I didn't buy a present for my mom. I'll at least give her this box," Selena thought. On the way, she bought a bouquet of white peonies. Her mother loved these flowers that filled everything around her with their sweet fragrance. Listening to her daughter's story about the strange old woman, Veronica didn't understand what was going on. "Are you sure you've never seen this woman before?" she asked her daughter. "I'm sure I would have remembered her. She has a very expressive appearance," Selena convinced her mother. "She was a Baba Yaga, very unpleasant. I had a frost on my skin from her touch." "Mystical," her mother said thoughtfully. She took the pictures from the box again and looked at them. I can't believe he's alive, Selena said. Maybe it's a prank. Someone decided to get on our nerves by bringing us back to the past. It's not about the past, look. Her mom handed her one of the pictures. This house wasn't there when her father died. It was a vacant lot. You should remember it. We used to pass through it sometimes when we wanted to take a shortcut from school to home. Selena looked closer. Indeed, this house had not been here before, but her father was photographed in front of it. The man was well dressed, smiling at the photographer in the camera lens. How so? The girl did not understand. He is alive and does not let his family know about it. Who did they bury in a grave in the cemetery then? Veronica and Selena sat pensively on the couch. Each was thinking about something different. The past often returns to people's lives, makes them remember old, already lost ties, makes adjustments to the present, but to resurrect the dead? That doesn't happen. However, they never saw their father dead. A coffin with his favorite things was lowered into the grave. They just had to pay tribute to the man, so that's what they did. This method of burial was insisted on by the father's mother, Selena's grandmother. Her son died. He is no longer alive, and I won't even have a place to go to the grave, she lamented, persuading Veronica to bury at least a coffin with his things. Suddenly, Harvey entered the room. "Why are you sitting there like water in your mouth?" he asked jokingly. His mother handed the boy a box of photographs. "What's this?" Harvey looked at the pictures. "That's my father." "And where did you get such pictures? I've never seen them before." "We haven't seen them either, son," said Veronica. "Selena had bought this box today at the flea market to give to me, and in it were fresh pictures of your father." "He's dead," the boy wondered. "Apparently not," Selena said. "Very much alive and looking good." "You guys look like crazy people right now." Selena's brother twisted his finger at his temple. He left the room, thinking that women were strange creatures and it was impossible to understand the logic of their thinking. Trying to distract herself from the strange thoughts, Veronica asked her daughter, "How are things at the institute?" "Everything is fine, Mommy," the girl replied. Outside, the window began to darken, but she was not going to leave. It seemed strange to Veronica. Her daughter had been living with her childhood friend Ivan for a year. They sort of had a love affair, although Selena's mom had never liked the guy. She was always haunted by the feeling that at the first chance he would betray her daughter, hurt her. After what her husband had done, Veronica no longer believed in the decency of men, considered them all scoundrels. Nor did she believe Evan when he told her that he wanted to be together with Selena, to build a family together. "I don't want to pressure you," Veronica told her daughter, "but Evan is slippery, unreliable. So he seems to love me." Selena tried to argue uncertainly with her mother. "Time will tell whether he loves you or not," the woman said wisely. She drew on her own experience. She had once thought her husband loved her too. But after what he had done to them, after his family had fallen into debt, she had not tried to look for good qualities in men. That's why she never married again. And when did she have time to look for suitors? All her worries were only about how to feed her children and what to dress them in. After her husband died, Veronica had to take 3 jobs. Collectors constantly came to their miserable apartment, bought to replace a large 4-room apartment, demanding money. Fearing for her life and the lives of her children, Veronica saved on everything to put money aside to pay off her husband's debts. But no matter how much she paid, the interest accrued again and again. The amount of the debt almost never decreased. "I'll stay with you tonight," Selena said. "I have a lot of things to think about in peace." "Of course, my daughter." Her mother hugged her. "This is your home too. Is something wrong?" In Veronica's eyes there was concern for her daughter. She was proud of her. The girl studied and worked part-time, not a penny from her mother. But now she was worried about something. With Vanya quarreled, shared with her mother Selena, he has recently become some kind of alien or something. "I do not want to moralize," said her mother, "but I assume that long together you will not be. You're a kind girl though, and when your Evan comes to apologize, you'll melt. You'll go back to him." "I'm not so sure about that," Selena said, putting the pictures of her father back in the box. "Why waste time with a man who doesn't appreciate you?" Veronica thought she had raised not only a beautiful and kind daughter, but also a great smart girl. Selena, indeed, was judicious, always thinking over every step. The girl put the box on the trumeau, thought that it was necessary to sort it all out properly. She went to the pantry, took out a cot from there, made herself a sleeping place in the small kitchen. It's so nice to be in my own home with my loved ones, she thought as she drifted off to sleep. Selena's room had long been occupied by Harvey, and her mother slept on the couch in the hall, so there was no other place to spread out but the kitchen. At night, Selena dreamed of a strange old woman from the flea market. She grabbed her by the arm, laughed loudly, and said, "You'll learn the secret of your father. It will be easier on the soul and life will get better." The girl was awakened by the ringing of the cell phone. It was Evan. Without even saying hello, he shouted into the receiver, "Where are you? Why didn't you come home? I woke up in the night and you weren't there. I was at my mom's, and this is your house, not mine." Selena replied in a sleepy voice. She thought that Evan found her absence in the night, but didn't even try to find out where his girlfriend was. What if something happened to her? What if she was in trouble? He slept peacefully through the morning, and now he's calling trying to make her look guilty. Selena sat up on the cot. "Come on, don't be stupid. Come back," the guy said insistently. "I realize I said some unpleasant things to you, but am I wrong? You've really turned into a gray moth. Shall I come get you?" "No, you don't have to come," Selena said, "and don't call again." "Fuck you." She heard the voice of an angry Vanya. The girl realized that this is not a time out to make an important decision, to take a break in the relationship. This is a breakup. She doesn't want to be around Evan anymore, doesn't want to listen to his insults, doesn't want to be a gray moth. She was more preoccupied with other thoughts right now. Selena wanted to understand if her father was really alive. However, she almost didn't doubt it anymore. She threw on a robe, opened her laptop, and tiptoed into the hall where her mother was sleeping on the couch. Selena picked up the box of photos. She wanted to scan them and find proof on the internet that her father was alive. The scans produced 0 results, and Selena ran the scanner over and over again. Suddenly, one of the pictures was identified on a social networking site. It was the page of a woman she didn't know. Not a very young person, about 40 years old, was posting pictures with Selena's father. The girl scrutinized the strange woman's face. She had definitely never met her before, or she would definitely remember her. Who was she? Why was posting pictures of her dad? Where did she even take a picture of him? Veronica entered the kitchen. "Already awake, daughter? Good morning." The woman put the kettle on the stove, lit the gas, collect the cot, and I'll make breakfast. "Harvey has second period today. When are you going to the institute?" "I have to be home by second period, Mom," Selena answered, folding the bedding neatly and putting the cot in the closet. There was no hurry. She could eat breakfast in peace, especially since she had already missed her mother's cheesecakes with sour cream. Veronica set the table and poured tea into cups. Harvey, who had fallen asleep, rubbed his eyes and sat down on a stool, reaching for a plate of cheesecakes. "Go wash up first," his mother said. Later, waved the boy away. Veronica looked at him sternly, and the son had no choice but to wander into the bathroom. "How did you sleep, Selena?" Mom asked the girl. "Not very well," she answered. "She dreamt about that woman from the market all night. What a creepy old woman she is. In my dreams, she kept telling me about some secret." Selena told her mother that she found a page of a strange woman in social networks, that she put there photos of her father. The girl turned the laptop so that her mom could look at the screen. The woman gazed at the different pictures, flipping through the page. "I've never seen this woman," she said thoughtfully. "I certainly don't know her, and I've never seen my father before." "Who is that?" "And I don't know, Mom," answered her daughter, "but I'm determined to find out. Otherwise, I won't be able to sleep well." "And maybe you shouldn't. Try to persuade Selena, mother. For us, he's dead. And if it's not so, then why did he not show up? Maybe he was threatened because of his debts. He was afraid of being killed." Veronica felt her resentment and anger at her husband boiling up in her. He was alive, but he made me a widow and put me in debt. You remember how hard it was for us then, how we were deprived of a good home, a country house, how for days we ate rye bread and chowder, which had not a gram of fat, because there was nothing to buy meat with. Veronica broke apart. Sad memories came over her. Every time the bell rang in the apartment, she flinched, afraid that they would be killed, or that her children would be taken away from her. Often the debt collectors came when Mom was at work. They would ring the doorbell, and Selena would grab little Harvey, hold him with one hand, and with the other she would clamp her mouth shut so he wouldn't scream, so that the strange men would think no one was home. For several years, while the mother paid off her late husband's debts, the children did not know what candy was. She had nothing to buy clothes for her son and daughter. At night, the woman sewed on an old sewing machine, restitching some clothes to dress the children. Selena did not know what beautiful dresses and heeled shoes were, and Harvey was constantly teased by the boys in the yard. The children hardly ever saw their mother. Coming from one job, she again ran away to another, making sure only that her son and daughter were at home, that they were not stolen, not kidnapped. The woman was always tired, exhausted. She did not mourn her husband, did not think about their past life together. All Veronica's thoughts were occupied with how to pay off debts. What else to do so that the collectors got rid of her, stopped threatening? To help her mother, Selena began to clean the entrances in the neighboring apartment building. 4 entrances in a 9-story building was not easy for her. In addition, cleaning took a lot of time, and the girl still had to do her homework, pick up her younger brother from kindergarten, something to feed. The penny she received for cleaning the entrances, the girl gave to her mother, and the latter bought simple products. Earlier, when they had a country house, they often brought potatoes and other vegetables from there. Now there was not even this help. The formerly prosperous family quickly turned into a beggar family. Selena didn't even go to the graduation party because she had nothing to wear. "Don't make excuses for him," Veronica said. "I warned him that playing cards wouldn't do any good, but he didn't listen to me. He always did everything his own way and didn't want to consider us. He lived for his own pleasure. I had the misfortune to marry that coward and scoundrel." "Calm down," Mom tried to interrupt Veronica Selena, but the flow of her mother's bitterness, resentment, and anger seemed to be inexhaustible. The words were pouring out of her heart, filled with worry for the children who had to endure such deprivation, fear, half-starved life. However, no matter how bad it was, Veronica always tried only for her son and daughter. She denied herself everything. Sometimes she went to bed hungry, dividing her dinner between Selena and Kolka. Several years of fear for her children, hunger, poverty. Veronica was able to get out of all this only by paying off the debt to the debt collectors. But even now, when their family is not threatened, they live very poorly. Simple furniture, an unrenovated apartment, inexpensive clothes, only the bare necessities. It was good that Selena managed to enter the institute on a budget. If she had failed the entrance exams, her mother would have had nothing to pay for her daughter's studies on a commercial basis. The girl hugged her mother. She was afraid her blood pressure would skyrocket and tried to calm her down. "I'll try to figure it all out," Selena said confidently. "I'll try to find out who the old woman was who gave you that damn box with your father's pictures in it." Selena jabbed at her laptop again. "We need to geolocate, find out where the pictures were taken," she thought. The girl was looking at a photo in the gallery on the page of a strange woman. Here she was standing next to a large, luxurious 2-story cottage. It was obvious that the woman was not poor. She was wearing fashionable clothes, beautifully styled hair with the effect of lamination. In the background was visible plot of land with a pool and a gazebo, buried in rose bushes. It turns out that her father accumulated debts, realized that her mother would not help him, faked his death, and went to live with a rich woman. Selena's head began to form a logical chain that seemed unbelievable in its meanness. "It turns out so," agreed her mother, finishing the dishes after breakfast. Suddenly, Selena's laptop gave out a geolocation. It turned out that the house the beautiful woman had been photographed next to was 3 hours away from their town by train. "I'll have to go there. It's the only way I can find out something about my father. Find him and look him in the eye," Selena thought. She wrote down the address on a piece of paper, closed her laptop, and started to get ready for the institute. Leaving the house, she walked the same way, hoping to meet the old woman at the flea market. But the Baka, who looked like Baba Yaga, was nowhere to be found. Between lectures, Selena told about everything that happened yesterday to her friend Ekaterina. She listened without interrupting, and then said, "You do not worry. I myself was shocked yesterday from the way Evan treats you. I thought you were in love, but in reality, he's just using you and humiliating you. Sure, he likes it when he comes home to a hot dinner and at night, he gets his share of female affection. But a real man should not only receive, but also give. Your Ivan is not one of those real men. As for the story with the box, Catherine did not know how to support her friend. Told by her really was incredible, seemed unreal. I thought such stories only in the sick brain directors of various melodramas are born, smiled sadly Catherine. But apparently, and in life happens something that cannot be explained. We must try to find out all the facts, began to share his plan. Selena once again thanked her friend for her participation. The girls kissed on the cheek and parted. Right from the institute, Selena went to the train station. She bought a ticket and went to the platform. The girl was worried. She couldn't stop thinking about what she would say to the strange woman from the rich house. Selena tried to mentally talk through everything that had accumulated, built a dialogue with the stranger, assumed her answers to the questions that worried Selena. Immersed in her thoughts, she'd almost passed the desired station. Stepping onto the platform, the girl looked around. Apparently, it was a cottage village, because the settlement did not look like a village or a hamlet. She approached a man with a suitcase and asked for directions to the street, the name of which was written on a piece of paper. Sorry, girl. The man shook his head. I'm not from around here. I was visiting, so I can't help you. Selena walked away from the station building towards the houses on the first street she could find. Suddenly, she remembered that in her smartphone, she could download a map of the village and find the desired address. The girl sat down on a bench next to a store and started looking for the coordinates in her phone. It turned out that the house she needed was at the other end of the village. Selena walked down the street again. Despite the map she was looking at on her smartphone, she was still lost. There was no way she could figure out where she was. When she saw a woman with a stroller walking towards her, she decided to ask for help. Hello, can you tell me how to get to this address? She addressed the young mother. The woman stopped, still rocking the stroller, looked at the leaf. It is very close, she said, showing the direction with her hand. Go straight, then turn right and to the end of the street. Thank you, Selena thanked her. After a while, she found herself at the right house. The girl recognized it. It was exactly the same as in the picture. The entrance to the plot was blocked by a high, massive gate with forged elements, and next to it was a wicket. The girl rang the bell. A beautiful woman came out of the house. From the expression on her face, Selena realized that the stranger was not very happy to see the guest. Who are you and what do you want? The woman began to say, if you are going to sell me a vacuum cleaner or a toaster, go straight away. Go from day to day, no peace. Normal people do not buy anything from such passable, is not it clear? There are stores and marketplaces for shopping, and you're all wandering around the house, disturbing them with your visits. I'm sorry, Selena interrupted her. I'm not selling anything. Don't swear, please, and I'm sorry again for bothering you. She pulled out the photos she had taken from the wooden box, handing the woman one of the pictures. I need to know what your connection is to this man. The girl spoke up. The woman took the photograph in her hands, looked at the image carefully. It was clear from her face that she knew him. And why should I tell you anything? She asked. Who are you anyway? The thing is, the picture is of my father. He died tragically 10 years ago. Dead, you say? The woman was surprised, but I think he's alive and doing very well. So you know him? Selena asked. The woman opened the gate wide and gestured for the girl to come in. Let's go into the house. Selena followed the stranger, her heart racing. A few more minutes and she would know everything about her father. Maybe then she could understand why he had acted so shamelessly to this family, why he had made her mother suffer, abandoned her son and daughter. The woman led Selena into the house. They entered the large kitchen. What a setting, Selena thought to herself. Looking at the luxurious kitchen set, the bar counter with high chairs, outlandish appliances. You sit down wherever you feel comfortable, the woman said, and I'll make some coffee. Do you want coffee or tea? Coffee is fine, Selena replied modestly. My name is Emma, said the woman, pouring the beans into the tank of the coffee machine. I'm Selena, in the picture is my father. His name was Victor. I've heard that before. You don't have to repeat it. The girl was silent, waiting for Emma to say something about her father. but the woman silently took out cups from the cupboard, preparing a flavorful drink. "When did you say your father died?" She finally spoke. 10 years ago, he was in a car accident. We buried him in a closed coffin, putting there only things. They never found the body. "Where did you get those pictures?" Emma asked. "The pictures came to me by accident. I bought the box at the market from an old woman, not because I liked it, but because she begged me to. And I thought maybe she didn't have enough money for food," Selena told me. She was silent for a while, then said in a quiet voice, "When my father died, my mother also stood at the flea market and sold things, because my brother and I had nothing to feed. I met Victor also about 10 years ago." Selena began her story. "He seemed very lonely to me. I had just divorced my husband. I needed companionship. I wanted to distract myself from the memories of separation. And then Victor came along. He seemed calm and balanced, not like my ex-husband, who regularly beat me. Because of his beatings, I can't have children now." "That's terrible," Selena said. The girl herself thought that it was true. Her father was alive, and he knew Emma. That was the key to the mystery Selena wanted to solve. "We started dating Victor," Emma continued, "and with him I forgot about the divorce and my abuser husband. Victor never laid a hand on me. We lived in my apartment downtown. I have a large apartment, combined from two on the same stairwell. But Victor kept insisting that we buy a country house, somewhere away from the city. It seemed noisy and dirty to him, you see. Of course, he wanted to go far away so he wouldn't accidentally run into our mom or his kids somewhere," Selena thought. "And you bought this house?" she asked Emma. "Yes, my father is not the last man in our region. He holds a very good position. I borrowed money from him." "Notice," she said, "a very large sum of money. That's when we bought this house, started living here. My apartment in the city was still empty. I did not want to sell it, and it is very expensive. It is not easy to find a buyer in a provincial city. You drink coffee. Do not be shy. Take sandwiches, probably hungry from the road." The woman moved the cup of coffee and a plate of sandwiches closer to Selena. The girl felt hungry. She hadn't eaten anything since this morning. "Thank you so much," she thanked Emma. "I really am starving." Chewing on a bun with cheese and sausage, she asked, "Did my father ever tell you that he had a family?" "He never said a word. I also thought it was strange that he didn't care that I couldn't have children. My ex beat me up so badly I had to have surgery, which left me infertile. But nothing. He still longed to sit in jail. My father tried, attracted all the connections, that this bastard for a long time closed." Selena realized that Emma is immersed in his own memories and leaves the topic of conversation, which was so important for the girl. "Where is Victor? I mean my father now?" she asked Emma. "He went to the neighboring village on business," the woman answered. "Do you want more coffee?" Selena nodded, moving the empty cup towards Emma. "I'm sorry, I can't offer you anything but sandwiches. Cooking isn't really my thing. Victor usually does that." Selena thought the woman was talking about some other man, not her father. Dad never stood at the stove. In fact, he didn't even make his own sandwiches or fry his own eggs. That was all Mommy's job. She suddenly decided that it was not worth beating around the bush. Emma had treated her well, so it was time to tell it like it was. "You see," Selena began her story, "we were a close-knit, well-to-do family. My little brother and I didn't need anything. But after Kolia was born, my father was replaced. I began to hear often that he raises his voice at my mother, and he was always disappearing somewhere, could come in the morning, was nervous, constantly angry. I only later learned that my father started playing cards, and this hobby turned into an addiction. It's also called gambling addiction." "Yes, it can happen," Emma nodded. She sat down across from Selena, palm resting on her chin, ready to listen. "One day, the police called my mom and told her that my dad had been killed in a car accident. More precisely, they said that his car had overturned and fallen off the bridge into the river. The investigation team and divers worked there, but they didn't find my father's body. They thought he was carried away by the current. That's how we buried him." "He was actually alive, I take it?" Emma asked. "Yes, I'm sure of it now," Celine said. She liked Emma more and more. She wanted to tell everything to this woman she had seen for the first time. "After the funeral, strange men showed up at our apartment. They were debt collectors who had come to collect my father's debts. Mom explained to them that he was not alive, But the men said that now she owed them for her husband, and if she didn't give them the money, our bodies would be found somewhere in the forest or in the river. Mom was very afraid for herself and even more afraid for Harvey and me. She sold our house outside the city, sold the apartment, collected money from acquaintances, sold things, furniture, dishes. But the amount collected wasn't enough. Collectors threatened every time. My mom started working 3 jobs, but we were still starving. Harvey was sometimes not taken to kindergarten because he had no clothes or shoes. My mom was very tired. The 3 jobs and constant hunger severely damaged her health. Did she die? Emma asked. No. Thank God. But now she's often sick. Her legs don't walk well. Her blood pressure is skyrocketing. But don't think, she doesn't complain. She did everything to keep us from starving to death and to get the debt collectors off our backs. God, that's terrible, Emma said. I'm so sorry for you and your mom. So much to go through. We're not very well off now, but we have enough to live on. My mom still works. I work part-time, and Harvey is in school. The only thing I don't understand is why my dad didn't let me know he was alive. If he was afraid for his life, that he'd be found and killed for his debts. Why did he worry about us? He faked his own death and ran away, jeopardizing the lives of the people closest to him and children who were certainly not to blame for what happened to him. Emma pressed her lips together. It was obvious that she didn't know the answers to the questions that bothered the pretty girl sitting across from her. The woman looked out the window. There's Victor, she said. A large black car pulled up to the house. The gate swung open automatically, and the car drove into the yard. A man got out. Selena recognized him as her father. He hadn't changed much in 10 years. He looked very good. Victor, we have company, Emma shouted. She probably wanted to warn Selena's father that she wasn't alone. Yes, there was a man's voice. Who's visiting? Selena's dad walked into the kitchen. She stared at him, unable to say a word. Is that you? Dad said. He went to the sideboard, took out a glass and a bottle of whiskey and poured some. Why am I not surprised? Maybe because you were always waiting and afraid that your secret would be revealed. Suddenly, Selena answered sharply. Why did you come here? Why did you find me? Asked her father. To look into your eyes, to ask why you did this to Mom and to us. Selena felt anger boiling inside her. In her father's eyes, she saw no sense of remorse, no regret, no pity. There was only fear in them. The man had lived all these years afraid of being found, of being forced to pay back the money he had borrowed. Here, look. Taking a sip from the glass, Victor turned to his daughter. At that moment, she was amazed at how insolent his look was. She looked. Now get out and don't dare to tell anyone about me. The father loomed menacingly over the girl. She looked up at him, tears welling up in her eyes. Selena had hoped to the last minute that her father's forced act had been weighing on him for the past 10 years, that he was worried about his family, that his heart was bleeding. But this man seemed to have the coldest heart of all. When you died, Selena was silent for a moment, then continued in a quiet voice, afraid to cry. The debt collectors came to our house. They were beating the money out of Mom. Mom sold everything to pay back what you borrowed from different credit companies. We had nothing to eat, nothing to wear. Mom worked 3 jobs. We were starving. Do you realize that? Your children and the woman you love were starving, exhausted by hard labor. Mom did everything she could to keep us alive and pay off your debts. It cost her her health and us several years of humiliation. I was called a beggar at school because I wore overstitched clothes that were always darned. Did you feel sorry for us? Did you regret anything? The girl's eyes were filled with a pain that was hard to bear. Victor straightened up. Again splashed whiskey into the glass. I haven't loved your mother for a long time, he said, but I didn't know my debts would be kicked out of her. Suddenly, he turned to face Selena. It was twisted with a grimace of anger. I didn't know. He shouted, do you realize that? Now get out and don't ever let me see you again. Get out, I said. Selena slowly stood up and walked towards the exit. In the doorway, she stopped, turned around and said quietly, I feel sorry for you. You have no one in this life. Emma remained silent the whole time, watching the drama playing out in her house. When Selena went to the front door, she caught up with her and walked her to the gate. In parting, the woman said, Selena, please leave me your phone number. The girl took out of her purse a notebook in which she usually wrote down the schedule of lectures at the institute, wrote the phone number, and gave it to Emma. She quickly walked away, no longer holding back her tears. How much time passed until the girl reached the train station, she did not know. Selena got lost again in the unfamiliar village, wandered through the streets, and when she got to the platform, the railroad platform was empty and night had fallen on the village. The station building was closed. Seeing the schedule on the door, Selena realized that there would be no more trains today and she would have to wait until morning. The autumn wind blew strongly. The weather, which had been so pleasant during the day, turned bad. The girl shivered, wrapped herself in a thin windbreaker. She wanted to sleep. Selena sat down on a bench, began to peck her nose, her eyes closed by themselves. Her body's defenses were working, forcing her to fall into a deep sleep to survive the extreme stress she had experienced today. Selena lay down on the bench, put her purse next to her, and fell into a deep sleep. Emma's face appeared in her visions, then her father's angry grimace. She woke up to someone snatching her purse from her hands. When she opened her eyes, she saw a boy running down the platform, holding her bag in his hands. That was the last straw, Selena sobbed, unable to hold back her tears. She sobbed like a child who had been badly hurt. The girl didn't understand why all this was happening to her, why she had come here at all, why she was looking for her father. What did she expect? That he would rush to hug and kiss her? That he'd apologize on his knees? No, that didn't happen. It wasn't his style. His father was a selfish man who cared only about his own well-being and didn't care about his family at all. Dawn was barely breaking in the sky. It was still a long way off until morning. Selena approached the station building, wiping her tears with the sleeve of her windbreaker. The first train was at 10 o'clock. She glanced at her watch. It showed 4 in the morning. Sitting at the station was pointless. The money for the ticket was left in the purse the boy had stolen. After thinking for a while, Selena took her cell phone out of her pocket and dialed Catherine's number. She picked up the phone surprisingly quickly. "Catherine, sorry to wake you up," Selena began to speak. "What happened? Why are you calling so early? Where are you?" "Worried friend. I'm in the village that the navigator pointed me to at the train station." Selena's voice suddenly snapped and she sobbed again. "Selena, calm down. Tell everything in order." Catherine was very worried about her friend. She was waiting for her to call in the evening and tell the news about her father, but there was no call. "My bag was stolen, and there is money for the return ticket." Calming down, complained the girl. "So everything will be fine," assured her friend. "Send me the coordinates. I'm on my way to you." "But you don't go anywhere, you hear? Don't go anywhere." "Okay," Selena replied. "I'll be waiting here on the bench on the platform. I'm on my way. Hang in there. I'll try to be quick," said her friend and disconnected. The girl leaned back on the bench. Everything that had happened to her yesterday seemed like a nightmare, a terrible dream. She waited for Katerina, occasionally glancing at her watch. 3 hours later, a red car appeared in the parking lot near the railway station. Selena's friend ran out of it. She hugged her, stroking her hair, saying, "It's all right now, don't worry." Whether from the stress she had experienced or from the cold, Selena was shivering. Noticing this, Catherine quickly led her friend to the car. "Sit down," she said, and herself pulled out of the trunk plush plate, covered Selena well that I took a thermos with hot tea. Though while rumbling in the kitchen, Mother woke up, and she began to grumble in her sleep that I at night wandered here and there. Catherine said something without a word, and her words echoed somewhere far away. "Oh, let's go home." Finally sat down behind the wheel, Catherine. "We will not hurry. Let's go quietly." Here I was flying like crazy. It's good at least the roads are empty, and that I still do not know how to overtake normally. The car started and drove down the street toward the exit from the village. The girls were silent. Catherine realized that now is not the time for questioning. She kept thinking what horror Selena must have experienced, seeing her father, whom she thought was dead. Suddenly, Selena began to sob loudly and then cried again. Without saying anything, Catherine stopped the car, pulling to the curb. She remained silent, looking out the windshield, realizing that her friend just needed to cry. Catherine had given her that opportunity. When Selena had calmed down, they set off again. Already on the approach to the city, Selena spoke up herself. "Thank you, Catherine, for getting me out of there. In fact, I was really scared when I was alone at the train station, and even without money to get home." "Don't thank me, we are friends," Catherine replied, "and I offered you to take my car. Would not have had to endure so much." If only her friend knew how much Selena had to go through yesterday. She suddenly really wanted to share with Catherine, and the latter, as if sensing Selena's mood, asked, "Well, did you at least have a successful trip? Did you find answers to your questions?" "Found," said Selena sadly. "Only after these answers, questions became even more." "What do you mean?" "Don't talk in riddles. Rebuses are not my thing." Catherine looked at her friend carefully, then moved her gaze to the road. "Have you seen your father? He is not really dead. Alive and well and even feels very good," said Selena. "He lives in a luxurious house with a beautiful woman, drives an expensive car, does not give a shit that his family almost starved to death because of his debts." "No way," stretched out her friend. Selena briefly told her everything that had happened yesterday about Emma and her father, and how he'd driven her away. "I didn't think people could be so cruel to their loved ones," Catherine muttered. "You're his children." "Apparently they can," Selena replied in a philosophical tone. They had already arrived at her house. It was time to say goodbye. "Katusha, tell the Institute that I feel bad, that I'm sick," asked Selena and Katerina. "Sure, don't even worry." The friends said goodbye, and Selena wandered to her entrance. She wanted to take a hot shower and go to bed. Her mom was already awake. Seeing her daughter exhausted by a sleepless night and nervousness, she straightened her couch in the hall. When the girl came out of the bathroom, the woman did not question her about anything, silently went out and closed the door to the room so that Harvey, who had woken up, would not wake up her sister. Veronica also found out something. She did not sit idly by and try to find the old woman who had sold her daughter a box of photographs. She suspected that her dead husband's brother, Oliver, might have known about the old woman. After walking Harvey to school, the woman began to make soup, trying not to make any noise so as not to wake her daughter. She realized from the look on Selena's face that a lot had happened to her yesterday, so they would have something to talk about when her daughter woke up. Selena woke up in the afternoon. From the kitchen came Kolia's voice. "I don't want soup," refused to eat lunch boy. He studied in the first shift and had already returned from school, had to make cutlets with pasta. "Come on, eat," trying to speak quietly, ordered his mother. "In the evening, I'll make you cutlets with pasta, and now eat soup. You've been starving all day," shaking your empty guts. "You didn't eat in the school cafeteria again, did you?" "It's not good there," Selena's brother continued to whine unhappily. The girl took a robe from the back of the chair, threw it on, went to the kitchen. Very hungry to eat, and the aroma of chicken broth even more caused hungry salivation. "Good morning, everyone." Forgetting that she had already slept through lunch, Selena said. "What a morning," Harvey said indignantly. "Where have you been all night? Were you running to your beloved Avon again?" "No, I wasn't." Harvey jokingly slapped her brother on the forehead. "Chew on that and go to your room. Mom and I need to have a serious talk. Our conversation is not for children's ears." "Oh, found a child." Harvey considered himself all grown up and didn't like it when his sister pointed out that he was much younger than her. When he left, Veronica closed the door to the kitchen and sat down at the table with her daughter. Selena could see that her mother was waiting for news from her, but didn't know how to begin to tell her about the nightmare she had experienced yesterday in the unfamiliar village. Seeing her daughter's confusion, Veronica began her story. "When you left for the Institute," said the woman, "I went to the flea market. According to the signs you described, I started looking for the old woman. While I was looking for her, I thought, just show your face to me, I'll shake your soul out of you. But I'll know everything about my dead husband." So I was walking, and I saw Victor's brother standing there talking to some gnarled old woman. He shoved money into her hands, and he went to the exit of the bazaar with quick steps. I rushed after him. Why? Selena didn't understand. Uncle Oliver had never been on good terms with her father. They were always quarreling, and her paternal grandmother had always loved Victor more than Oliver. The girl looked at her mother incomprehensively. I wouldn't even talk to him. Knowing our situation, he wouldn't even help us with a penny or a piece of bread. and he couldn't have known that we were being drained of our father's debts. He didn't know, Veronica continued, so I caught up with him, shouting, Oliver, wait, stop. He turned around, recognized me, and wasn't surprised to see me. I asked him who the woman he was talking to was, and also what he'd given her the money for. Then Oliver said it was time to tell me all about my husband and invited me to the cafe. Oliver was the eldest in the family. Besides him, there was Victor, who was 3 years younger, and his sister Natalie, the youngest. The children had never been friendly with each other. In childhood, they constantly quarreled, taking away each other's toys, bicycles, and sweets. As they grew up, they started fighting over money. Oliver knew that his mother, Veronica's mother-in-law, was always helping Victor with money, giving it to him without asking him to give it back. To her eldest son, however, his mother gave nothing. He worked hard and independently built a house for his family. When Oliver learned about the death of his brother, he was very worried. Despite the fact that they were friends, never talked heart to heart, never spent time together, such an early and tragic death Oliver would not have wished an enemy. He sincerely mourned his brother in the cemetery, supported his mother, who killed with grief, all the time trying to lie on the grave, shouting, "Take me with you, son." I felt sorry for Oliver and the family of his dead brother. They saw each other rarely. He almost did not know Victor's children and did not communicate with his wife. With his brother, they were like strangers. That's why Oliver didn't go to Veronica after the funeral, just as he didn't go while his brother was alive. Twice a year, he went to his brother's grave on the date of his death and on Victor's birthday. He often met his mother and sister at the grave. One day, he happened to overhear their conversation. The women thought the man could not hear. He was going through something in the trunk of his car. Oliver, indeed, did not hear everything, but the essence of the conversation. He realized that Victor had not died at all, but had simply faked his death to hide from the debt collectors, who were shaking money out of him and threatening him with death. Victor had thought it all through. Victor's mother told her youngest daughter, "It's scary to think what would have happened to him if we hadn't helped him fake the accident. Those bandits would probably have killed him already." "Yes, Mom, it's good that he's safe now," answered the daughter. "When was the last time you saw him?" 2 months ago," answered the woman. "We met secretly at the train station. We can't let anyone know Victor is alive, or they'll be looking for him again." Oliver got a chill inside. He'd never felt much warmth for his mother and sister, but to realize they were such complete hypocrites was beyond him. He approached the women and asked one single question. "So the brother didn't die in the car accident then?" Mother and daughter were confused. Oliver's mother was the first to pull herself together. "What are you talking nonsense, son?" she ranted. "There he is, lying breathless in the grave. Our Victor is dead, gone prematurely in the prime of life, and we can only mourn him and carry flowers to this grave." "Enough, mother," Oliver interrupted her. "I've heard everything. You just said you met him 2 months ago at the train station." "You misunderstood, Oliver." The mother tried to justify herself. "I didn't meet him." At this point, the sister entered the conversation. "Mom, maybe you should stop hiding from Oliver that Victor is alive. He's still his own brother." "Yes, so dear that they fought every day, did not give each other hands." The woman was indignant and angry, and Oliveira would be the first to give his brother to the collectors. "You think badly of me, Mom," the man said, turned away, hurried to his car. He realized that all these years his relatives deceived him, did not trust the secret, and he, like a fool, went to his brother's grave, put it in order, put a stone monument and a fence on his own money. Oliver thought that even if they quarreled when he was alive, he would make sure that his brother's burial place looked decent. "Did you believe him, Mom?" Selena asked Veronica. It seemed unreal to her, what Uncle Oliver said. "And you remember how grandmother had killed herself at the funeral, how she yelled at the cemetery, 'Son, take me with you to the grave.' That's the thing," Veronica said. "My mother-in-law never loved me. That's why she didn't trust me with the terrible secret of staging a car accident. But I did not even suspect what acting talents she possesses, because so played out the grief of his mother that even a skeptic would believe and laid down next to the grave to weep with her at the same time." That's right. Celine supported her mother. She remembered that day well and had not yet forgotten how his grandmother was writhing on her son's grave. So, Veronica continued, Oliver kept the news that his brother was alive for a long time, but it kept him awake. He started coming home to his mother's house more often to find any clues, to try to grasp at something that would lead him to his brother. He wanted to tell them what was going on in our family, how poor we were, how we were in debt. One day, Oliver noticed that his mother was going somewhere. In the hallway was a densely packed bag, closed tightly with a zipper. Oliver followed her and saw her meeting Victor in the park. He couldn't believe his eyes for a long time. His brother looked quite healthy, even a little better. When mother and son said goodbye, Oliver followed his brother and tracked down where he lived. He couldn't resist going up to him and saying something nasty. Oliver resented the fact that Victor had the conscience to deceive everyone, while he lived in a beautiful house. A few days later, Oliver came to the village again, bringing his camera with him. He took a few pictures. In his heart, Oliver wanted to take revenge on his brother and show the pictures to his wife, but he didn't dare to do it. He's a coward like Victor, a hypocrite like their mother, Veronica said, but the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And they also say that oranges don't come from aspens. Selena agreed with her mother. Yeah, that's right. Oliver preferred, like his relatives, to shift responsibility to other people, continuing to tell. Veronica poured tea for her daughter, moved the vase with jam. They all used to do everything by the hands of others. He couldn't wait to tell me that I wasn't a widow, but he was afraid. So he hired that old woman. He watched our family, knew almost everything about our lives. He knew which way you went to the bus stop to get to the institute and which way you came back. But he wanted to show me the pictures first. Oliver would pay an old woman to hit on me on the street under the guise of a psychic. When she did, Veronica yelled at the old woman and swung her bag at her so hard that she hurried away. Selena's mother was not a cowardly and indecisive person. She hated beggars and all those who tried to fool people's heads with predictions. Oliver's attempt failed, then he decided to act through Selena. The old woman caught up with you and handed you the damn box, and you bought it from her out of the goodness of your heart, thinking she couldn't afford to buy food. Yes, that's what I thought, Selena confirmed. I remember hunger. I always feel sorry for people who are in trouble. Your kind heart is the reason why this box of pictures appeared in our house. That's the whole story, and then you can tell me the rest. Wait, Mom, interrupted her daughter, but Uncle Oliver, he's what? And that Uncle Oliver, he apologized to me for a long time. He said that he himself knew nothing, that if that accidentally overheard conversation, he would still consider his brother dead. Realizing that the conversation will now continue, and it will be long, Veronica again put the kettle on the stove to heat. He hated his brother, always wanted to hurt him. By revealing this terrible secret to us, he has his own agenda first and foremost. Oliver wants us to tell the police and the debt collectors that your father's alive. That's gonna hurt Victor, and it's not like Oliver had anything to do with it. I'm telling you, the whole family are cowards who can't solve their own problems. Do you believe that Uncle Oliver didn't know? The girl asked. 50-50, the mother replied, and I wouldn't be surprised if he's lying, if they were all working together on a plan to stage Victor's death. Oliver's just afraid to admit it. Mom, I feel like this isn't happening to us, like we're watching a movie. Unfortunately, we are, daughter. Selena shook her head. In turn, Selena also spoke about the information she had received. She told her mother how she had met Emma, her father's new wife. She didn't immediately understand me. At first, she thought I was one of those salesmen who go door to door and offer to buy all sorts of nonsense, Selena said. But then she invited me in and even fed me. She must be a good woman, Veronica said. But I didn't recognize my father. I saw nothing but coldness and anger in his gaze. Just imagine, he just chased me out of the house, threw me out the door like a kitten. Veronica's heart ached. She could imagine how her daughter felt. Her own father, whom she had lost in childhood, for whom she had suffered so much, did not even ask her how she lived, how she finished school, how she entered the institute. What is going on in the fate of his daughter? And after all, she is his own blood, his first child. Veronica loved her children very much. With every cell of her body, she felt when they were bad, when they suffered, and also suffered with them. She would never have let anyone hurt Lara or Harvey, but there was a mean man who didn't care about the children at all. She didn't know what to say to Selena. And she hesitated for a moment, then said quietly but firmly, "And you kick him out of your memory just as he chased you out of the door. Forget about him, daughter. Maybe that will make life easier." "I will, Mom," Selena promised. The next day she went to the institute. It was the last year of her studies, the most important. Selena hoped to graduate with a red diploma, so she took her studies seriously. Evan was waiting for her at the entrance. "Hi," as if nothing had happened, said the guy. "Hello," the girl answered him. Selena stopped fooling around. "Come on, come back to my place." The girl looked at him and slowly walked towards the institute. Evan followed her. Evan tried to take her hand, but Selena pulled it away. "Put it in her pocket. Don't fool around, Selena. After the institute, I'll help you to bring back the things you took. We'll live like before. I'm bored without you, do you understand?" Suddenly, the guy changed his tone, and in general, "I come home to eat nothing to eat. The room is a mess. Things clean and ironed soon will not be left at all. In what I will go to lectures and to friends." He's not even trying to apologize, Selena thought. The guy didn't think he'd offended her at all, showing his not-so-facetious side. "I'm not going back, Evan," she muttered. The girl stopped and looked into Evan's eyes. "You know, I've realized a lot in the last few days. You are not capable of love. It is more important for you to use people to make your own life comfortable. I don't need such a person. Sooner or later you will betray me, and I don't want that." Selena walked down the path, opened the door to the institute building, and hid behind it. "Go to hell," Evan cursed angrily. After the lectures, Catherine and Selena went to the park. There was a small summer cafe where the girls liked to drink coffee and eat ice cream. Despite the fact that it was September, the cafe had not closed yet. The weather was perfect, sunny and warm. Selena really liked the way the park looked in September. It was completely immersed in the gold of the fall leaves. Rustling underfoot, they had a soothing effect on the girl. Sitting at a table in the cafe and waiting for their order, the friends talked quietly. "What are you and Mom now going to do?" asked Catherine. "Nothing," answered Selena. "We will live as we lived. This year I will have to work more part-time, but I will manage. I will get a diploma and go to work on a permanent job. Life will be more stable." "Don't you want to take revenge on your father for all the grief he caused you?" "No, this is not a solution. To resemble scoundrels, scoundrels. Hypocrites is not on the method," smiled Selena. "And Evan, what did you decide with him?" "Did not restrain, did not stop asking questions, Catherine." "With Evan we parted," answered the friend, feeling how from these aloud-spoken words she becomes easier on the soul. "You see, Catherine, Evan does not need me. He needs a nanny and a lover in one person. And I still want to be happy myself. Maybe I'll meet a man who will love me for real, will care, not insult me. Evan couldn't even break up properly. He insulted me again and sent me to hell. He didn't even realize that I could live perfectly well without him." The friends talked for a long time, but time was running out and we had to break up. I'll give you a ride home," Catherine offered. "No, thank you, dear. I want to walk," Selena refused. She went to the bus stop. Walking through the place where the old woman sold her a box of photographs, the girl noticed a familiar figure. She leisurely approached the old woman. "Hello," Selena said with a smile. The grandmother looked at her with an attentive gaze. At first it seemed to the girl that she did not recognize her, did not remember that student, whom she almost forced to buy the thing. But the old woman remembered her perfectly well. "Did you recognize the secret?" she asked. "Grandma did," Selena replied. "Doesn't it make you feel better?" the old woman asked. "Yes," Selena agreed. Then buy a kitten. The grandmother took out a fluffy lump with big eyes from under her coat. The kitten was barely a month old. "It's a puerile little kitten," looking at Selena. "It will bring you happiness." Selena opened her purse, took out her wallet, and handed the grandmother a bill. "I don't have any more," she said. "And I have enough." The old woman handed the girl the animal. Selena gently cuddled it to her and walked leisurely in the direction of her house. And the old woman waved her hand, quietly whispered, "He will bring you happiness." As she approached the entryway, Selena noticed that the light in the kitchen was on. "Probably Mom is cooking dinner," the girl thought. "I'm here," she shouted, opening the door with her key. "Who's home?" Harvey ran out to meet her. "What are you yelling about?" "Mom's having some important conversation in the kitchen. She sent me away," told me to be quiet in the room, the boy warned her sister. He noticed a kitten in her hands. Oh, how tiny! The guy's voice sounded a few tones higher. He was practically squeaking, admiring the creature in Selena's hands. Where did you get it? Let me hold it. Do you think Mom will let me keep him? Here, said the girl, holding out the kitten to her brother, and go to your room since Mom told you to. So she really does have serious business. Who's in the kitchen? I don't know, some woman. My brother walked down the hall. When Selena entered the kitchen, she was speechless. Sitting at the same table as her mom was Emma. They were drinking tea, talking. Selena came from the institute, exclaimed Veronica. Come in, daughter. Sit down. Or rather Emma needs to talk to you. Hello, Selena, smiled the woman. Good evening. Not understanding anything, replied the girl. She pulled out a stool from under the table, hesitantly sat down. And how did you find us? You wrote me your phone number, said the woman, and her face was smiling. And I have serious connections that can easily find out any information about a person. And to get his address, find out his phone number, it's a matter of minutes. I thought I'd never see you again, Selena said, surprised. But I thought I'd never see you again. But I immediately realized that you and I will meet again, Emma said, which further confused the girl. You know, daughter, Veronica said, Emma is just as you described her, a very sweet and cordial woman. But it was our father who made her unhappy. Not understanding anything, Selena looked at her mother and then at the guest. Yes, that's how it is in life, dear. Emma continued the conversation. I thought everything was settled in my life. After hard years of life with my first husband, after his beatings and abuse, I met a decent man with whom I can meet my old age. Selena's mom laughed good-naturedly. It is unlikely. Next to people like Victor, old age is not in joy, rotten man, said Veronica. But it didn't seem so to me at first. I even sincerely thought that I had fallen in love with him. It seems uneconomic, and at home a lot can do. True, he did not really like my father, but he always put up with my desires, because the main thing for the parent of the only daughter that she was happy. So he put up with it, but he came to visit less often. He was not happy to see Victor. Veronica poured tea. Selena asked Emma, would you like some more hot tea? No, Veronica. Thank you. She covered the cup with her palm. Celine noticed the expensive makeup, smooth skin, and several rings adorning Emma's long fingers. We would have lived like this with Victor if Selena hadn't shown up. The woman looked at the girl meaningfully. I didn't really want her to go after my father. Something told me that the information the daughter received could be poison, and it would hurt her a lot, the girl's mother said, propping her head up with her palm. She wasn't the only one, Emma said, but when I watched Victor's behavior with his daughter, it was heartbreaking. How much cruelty to his own child was revealed in him. And it wasn't Selena's fault. It was very painful for me to hear my husband's words when he shouted, swore, and threw the girl out of our house. I already realized then that I will not live with Victor, but I will definitely meet Selena. So you broke up with my father? Selena asked. Yes, but let's talk about everything in order. When Victor kicked Selena out of the house, Emma took the girl's cell phone number and returned to the kitchen. Her husband, as if nothing had happened, was heating up cutlets in the microwave. The face that had just been angry was calm again, as if absolutely nothing had happened in his life. Emma didn't know how to begin the difficult conversation about her husband's past. She hoped he would tell her everything, try to explain, justify himself. But the man remained silent. Then she decided to be the first to speak. Why didn't you ever tell me that you had a wife and 2 children? Emma asked. Would it change anything? Victor answered with a question. They have nothing to do with you. They are in my past. So why don't you tell me about your past? I basically know nothing about you. All information about you, as it turns out, is under a veil of secrecy. Victor didn't like the conversation Emma had started, but he tried to keep his cool, not to be rude to his wife. In the time he'd lived in her house, he'd grown accustomed to a sweet, carefree life. Sometimes he returned to his hometown to see his mother. This connection each time gave him the assurance that he was no longer wanted. Everyone considered Victor dead, and then Selena appeared out of nowhere. Victor did not understand how she could know that he was alive, how she found his address, but deep down he felt that sooner or later his secret would be revealed. Any information can only remain reliably secret when only one person possesses it. And what two people know, everyone knows, seems to be the popular wisdom. His mother and his sister knew that Victor was not dead. When the man came to his mother and told her that he was being chased by bandits, the woman was worried. Natalie was home that day too. The three of them sat down in the kitchen and began to think about how Victor could get away from the debt collectors. "You should go away," the sister suggested. "It's useless," her brother replied. "Those people are so powerful that they will find me even in Chicago. You can't hide from them anywhere. So we must convince them that there is no one else to collect debts from," said the man's mother. "What do you mean?" Brother and sister didn't understand. "Convince them that you're dead, no man, no debts." The three of them sat up until the morning, thinking over a plan of action. Burying a living person was not so easy. The most appealing plan seemed to be a car accident. "You should direct the car from the bridge. But at this time it is important to have time to open the door to get out," advised his mother. "Otherwise, underwater you cannot open and drown, die for real." Victor was scared for a moment. He was afraid to die in this crazy adventure, but he was even more afraid of the collectors. "You will succeed, son," his mother encouraged him, "and then when everything settles down, you will be able to live in peace. Natasha and I will do our best to make your funeral as realistic as possible." The sister nodded her head, agreeing with her mother. The plan had succeeded. Victor's body was not found. There was no one to bury him. The man was listed as missing. Then the man's mother went for a trick. She went to the investigator, almost lying at the feet of the policeman, begging him to change the status of her missing son. "He must have been swept away by the current. I'm sure my son drowned, choked by the river water. He was afraid of water since childhood, could not swim," sobbed inconsolable mother in the investigator's office. "Help the poor mother change the status of her son. I beg you. If you do not do this, we will not be able to make a grave in the cemetery. I don't have long to live in this world, but every day I want to come to this grave and mourn my son." She managed to convince the policeman. He changed her status and issued documents for the deceased Victor. So the woman went to her daughter-in-law and said, "Victor's body has not been found and is unlikely to be found, but we must make a burial ground so that there will be a place to come to honor him. You look for things of your husband, which were especially dear to him, which he loved when he was alive. We'll put them in the coffin and bury them, and we'll come to this grave with flowers to remember Victor." Veronica was surprised at the affectionate tone of her mother-in-law, who had never loved her son's wife, but took pity on her and agreed to bury Victor's things in the grave. The day of the funeral was appointed. The mother of Veronica's husband was out of her mind with grief, sobbing, falling to the ground, beating her head against the cross, set on a mound of cemetery earth. Her grief looked so natural that no one could suspect anything. Victor himself was present at his own funeral. Hiding behind the monuments, he watched from afar as the funeral procession went on, as the coffin was lowered into the grave, as his mother sobbed and his wife wiped away her tears. "It's all worked out," he triumphed. Everything changed when he saw his daughter in his house. Victor realized she can tell or has already told everything to his wife. She would definitely publicize the information because the woman did not know that her husband wanted to be considered dead in order to hide from debts. She will run, chalking her heels with happiness to the police to return him to the status of a living person and cancel the hard-won documents of Victor's mother. Everything he has now could float away from his hands. Emma stared at her husband, waiting for an answer, and he, like some movie on TV, was reviewing the pictures from his funeral. He was quite satisfied with a happy and carefree life with this beautiful woman, and he was also satisfied with the fact that she could not have children. The birth of heirs was no longer part of his life plans, but the man liked to live in his wife's beautiful house, drive an expensive car. Selling it could ruin his life. There would be debt collectors again. Despite the passage of so many years, these people do not forgive debts. They will even get them from the grave. I'm surprised they didn't do it. They would have found out Victor wasn't dead. "Darling," he spoke to Emma in an affectionate tone, "it's true that my past is complicated. Seeing my daughter has knocked me out, disturbed my peace. Let me calm down and I'll tell you everything in great detail in the next few days." "Okay," Emma agreed. And in the evening, when the woman was about to go to bed, She heard that her husband was talking to someone on the phone, trying to speak quietly so that his wife would not hear. "No, you don't understand. We have to take out all three of them. The woman, the girl, and the boy." "What do you mean? Take them out?" "For good, so that no one will find them." Emma realized that Victor wanted to kill his wife, daughter, and son and had asked someone for that favor. The woman's heart was racing. She suddenly remembered Selena's sad face as tears rolled silently down her cheeks from her eyes. The girl was suffering. She had been through so much, and this bastard wanted to kill her relatives so that no one would know the secret. When her husband fell asleep, Emma went down to the garden. She entered the gazebo, sat down on the sofa, dialed her father's phone number. The woman's father was a man of influence and never refused his daughter's requests. She could only tell him about the situation Emma was in. "Emma, Daddy, I'm sorry to wake you up, but this is very important." Her father was always ready to listen to his favorite daughter. The information she gave him went straight to the police department. The investigator who had long ago dealt with the case of the dead man was urgently summoned. Before morning, he managed to raise the documents, remember all the details, and prepare for Victor's arrest. Barely had the sun had time to light up the sky, Emma and Victor's house rang. The woman opened, letting the police officers in. "Are you Victor?" the investigator asked the still awake man. "I am," he answered uncertainly, "but what do you want?" Victor felt the danger. He was finished. He was about to be arrested. "You are under arrest on charges of faking your own death and a number of other charges. Follow us." "Yes, of course, but it's a misunderstanding." Victor tried to buy time. "We'll find out in the department whether it's a misunderstanding or not." The investigator clearly cut off his attempt to evade. "Let me at least get dressed. I can't go in my pajamas," Victor asked. "Yes, of course," replied the policeman. "You have 5 minutes." The man turned around and started to go up the stairs. Emma looked after him. Perhaps now she was seeing her husband for the last time. Suddenly there was a noise in the yard. It turned out that having gone up to the bedroom on the second floor, Victor had tried to escape by climbing down from the balcony, but the police officers who had stayed on the street were waiting for him downstairs. The man was loaded into a car with bars on the windows and taken to the city. "I was very sad and unpleasant to look at all this," Emma said, concluding the story, "but when I imagined what would happen to you, I clearly realized that I was doing the right thing. The fact that he escaped from debt is a separate issue, but to order the murder of his own children, that's a real atrocity. People like that shouldn't be allowed to go free." Selena listened to the woman, eyes wide. Daddy, whom she remembered kind, affectionate, cheerful, already showed his other side. But the girl couldn't imagine that he could do that to his family. Had they suffered little through his fault, little lived in starvation, giving his debts to debt collectors. But to kill, it was beyond her comprehension. "That's not all the news I want to tell you about," Emma continued. "Yesterday I went to the investigator, found out everything about Victor's past. The man turned out to be quite talkative, especially he was in a great mood from the fact that he was able to close the hanging, which spoiled his reputation for many years. The management of the investigator every now and then reminded him of this high-profile and resonant case, and now it will be sent for further investigation. The guilty will be punished." The woman asked the investigator to find out which of the collectors could have hunted Victor. The profession is not so common. It was impossible to imagine that there was a whole staff of such employees in the city. The investigator quickly got information about those who go to the wife of the arrested Victor. Then Emma headed toward them. Arrogant-looking men did not immediately want to listen to Emma, but she called her father, and in 10 minutes she was invited to the office of the head of the collection firm. She told everything to the important and rather fat man sitting across from her, and then asked, "Please tell me how much money your employees were able to collect from the woman whose husband had allegedly died." The supervisor thought for a moment, then stood up and walked over to a large cabinet with glass doors. From there, he took out a large folder, sat down in his seat, and began to study the debtor's file. Emma waited patiently. Then the man took a piece of paper and wrote a sum on it, handed it to the woman. Emma's eyes went wide and her heart raced. She grew up in a poor family. Her father held an important position and was always in leadership positions. Emma herself had no problems with money. She could afford a lot, but when she saw the amount, she almost fainted. Even for her, the amount written on a piece of paper by the head of the collection agency was cosmic, prohibitive. How could a poor woman pay such money for her husband without starving herself and her children? Emma thought. All evening she had not found a place for herself, wandering about the house from room to room, going from corner to corner. She didn't know how to help that humble girl, her mother and brother who had suffered so much in their lives because of Victor. She even felt guilty that she had given that bastard almost 10 years of a cloudless, carefree life. Everything the man wanted, Emma presented to him on a silver platter. He knew no refusal in anything. The woman never counted how much money he spent from her bank account. Finally, a good idea came into her head, as Emma herself thought. The woman sat down in her chair and dialed her father's number. Emma, Daddy, we need to help some very good people. Veronica and Selena listened to Emma in silence. They had questions as the new information came in, but they didn't interrupt the woman, seeing how hard this story was for her. Emma reached into her bag that hung on the kitchen door handle and pulled out some papers. This is the deed to my house. It's in your name. She turned to Veronica. My house is worth a lot of money. My father helped me to draw up the document quickly through a notary. I, in turn, went to a real estate agency and agreed to sell the property. Veronica and Selena did not immediately understand what Emma was getting at. The woman was silent for a while, looking at the papers spread out in front of the girl's mom. This house belongs to you now, Veronica, she said, and you can sell it and buy the children an apartment in a good neighborhood. That way they'll have their own place. Or you can go and live in this house. It has all the facilities, a big garden, and even a swimming pool. Emma smiled, and Veronica and Selena looked at her in bewilderment. Believe me, this is the smallest fraction of what I can do for you. I can't bear to think that while you were starving, depriving yourself of the most basic necessities, I was essentially making Victor comfortable. It hurts me so much to think about it. That's why I made the decision to give you this house. It's up to you what you do with it. Any help you need from me. Gradually coming to their senses, mother and daughter began to smile. And then Veronica asked Emma worriedly, "Where will you live?" "Don't worry about me. You forgot that I have a luxurious, huge apartment in the center of the city," the woman reassured them. "Frankly speaking, I never liked to live outside the city in this village. It was Victor who persuaded me. Now I understand why he had to." "Thank you so much. You're an incredible woman." Selena walked over to Emma and hugged her. She suddenly felt that this woman was very dear to her, very close, very kind. "That's not all," Emma said. She opened a beautiful leather purse with rhinestones and took out a plastic card. "This is for you, Veronica." She handed the card to the woman. "There is a certain amount of money in this account. I think it will be enough for you to live comfortably, to be able to finish your son's schooling, and to help him get ahead in life." "No, not at all." Veronica tried to refuse the gift, waving her hands. "Take it. I am very pleased to do something nice for you. I need to understand that you will not need anything more. Every month, the card balance will be replenished. I'll take care of it." All three of them hugged each other. Tears of joy rolled down Veronica's face. Several months passed. Veronica and Selena sold Emma's house and bought 2 one-bedroom apartments. Selena moved into one of them. The other was waiting for Harvey to grow up. The girl was settling in. She was happy that her mother was not poor, thanks to Emma, and she had her own cozy nest. On the first day, Selena brought Silly with her. That's what she called the kitten an old woman had sold her at the flea market. "Silly," Selena called loudly to her pet. "Where are you hiding, little one?" She walked around boxes of things, bulks, bags. The things were not yet unpacked, probably crawled into one of the boxes and sleeps there peacefully. The girl began to open the boxes one by one as she suddenly heard a knock on the door. She opened it. On the threshold stood a handsome young man. In his hands he was holding Silly. "Hello, I'm your neighbor. Isn't that your cute little creature on my balcony?" The man handed the kitten to Selena. "Come to me, you're my happiness," said the girl, smiling.